Before everything changed, life seemed simpler. My days revolved around work, the kids, and the small moments that made everything worthwhile. Diane and I were living the suburban dream: children, a nice home, and fulfilling careers. I believed our family life was stable, and that our small sacrifices were worthwhile for our children's happiness and security. However, looking back, there were signs of trouble, which were subtle at first and easily dismissed as the natural flow of time. Diane became increasingly distant over time. Initially, I attributed it to the difficulties of raising 4 children, managing a household, and her job responsibilities. I was tired all the time, so I didn't give it much thought, but something felt off. Sometimes I felt like a stranger in my own home. Diane was carrying a secret she would not reveal. I tried to ignore it, concentrating on being a good father and husband, but the unease grew stronger over time. One morning, I was rushing to prepare the kids for our trip. "Okay, everyone, let's go grab our bags and head to the car," I urged from inside. One of them yelled, "I cannot find my sunglasses. Check the top of your head." I quickly responded. "I found them," they called back. The children paraded past me, dropping their bags near the car. My old Subaru Outback, with a lot of miles but still dependable, was ready to go. I locked the front door, then walked to the driveway and opened the back hatch. The children tossed in their bags and scrambled to buckle up. After organizing my luggage, I got into the driver's seat and began my pre-trip checklist. "Is everybody here?" Andrea, Keith, Laura, Brittany. I called out and all 4 responded with a chorus of "Here." I went through the packing list: swimsuit, sunglasses, hat, flip-flops, running shoes, underwear, t-shirts, shorts, sunscreen, and phones/tablets. Everything we'll need for our Disney World trip. Everyone confirmed. "All right, Florida, here we come," I announced. "Yes!" they all shouted at the same time, and with that we headed to the airport for our spring break in Florida. The flight went directly to Orlando, and I had a rental van ready. By mid-afternoon, we would be in the pool. To keep things organized, I booked 2 adjoining rooms, one for the kids and one for me nearby. We had 5 days to visit all of the major attractions, plus a day at SeaWorld. I planned this trip in spite of my wife's objections. Diane wanted to join us, but she insisted on delaying until the summer due to her New York trip. I argued that she didn't really need to go to NYC and should join us instead. I lost the argument, but I stood firm and took the kids to Florida, while Diane went to New York as planned. Disney is a money-making machine. The park is massive, with a variety of hotels and resorts to suit your needs. The kids are having a great time, and my main job is to keep an eye on them and pay the bills, particularly for food. They eat a lot. I make sure we have at least 1 healthy meal per day, usually dinner. I also insist on vegetables, fruit, and milk in the morning, so I am not an entirely negligent father, allowing for unlimited junk food. My plan is to get back to the hotel by 4 p.m. to cool off in the pool, then prepare for dinner. They can swim again after dinner, but no later than 9 p.m. They've returned to their room and are preparing to sleep. Teeth brushed, quiet time until they fall asleep. Fresh air and exercise. They are usually asleep by 9:30 p.m. after being exhausted. I then relax with a beer, check my work emails, and make sure the kids call Diane every day. She understands the importance of being available to speak with them without distractions. I know what she's doing in New York, but she's not aware. I understand, and I intend to keep it that way. I know more about my wife than she does. I am aware that she has been involved with other men for some time. I also understand that I am not the biological father of our children, but rather one man who resembles me is. This is how the paternity issue has been avoided. Our children share my blood type. I got them tested. And yes, I've taken DNA tests. I am not naive. When I first met Diane, I was smitten with her. She's tall, blonde, attractive, and intelligent. What is not to love? That infatuation developed into love. We got married and had children. 4 of them arrived quickly, and life became entirely about family. My time was taken up by the children, Diane, the house, and work. I occasionally did something for myself, but it was rare. I began getting up early 3 times per week to run 5 or 6 miles before starting my day. Being a father is the most important role I play for others. You can depend on me for almost everything. Diane does an excellent job as their mother, working equally hard as I do. She was a stay-at-home mom for the first few years, but she has done well since returning to work. Her work, however, has become the source of the problem. More about that later. I'm aware of a few things, including the fact that my wife has been unfaithful for nearly our entire marriage. I discovered this by accident about 3 years ago. When I found out, it hit me hard. A doctor informed me that my blood type did not match my son Keith's, and after retesting, I discovered the truth. I was devastated. Now let me tell you about Tom, my children's biological father. Tom is, in my opinion, an absolute idiot, but Diane is smitten with him. He works for his father, Ralph, who established a successful construction company. Ralph and his wife live a lavish lifestyle, and Tom learned from his father that money can get you out of trouble. Tom married Margaret after she became pregnant, and their life appeared idyllic. Though Tom was never truly happy, I've always worked hard for my family, but after learning the truth, I realized I needed a backup plan in case Diane ever decided to leave me for Tom. Despite her infidelity, Diane appeared content with our lives. We are pleased with our children and her job. She never complained to me after I discovered I wasn't the biological father. I was depressed and considering my options. I even spoke with a lawyer. But each option had significant drawbacks. If I divorced Diane, she would most likely get custody of the children, and I would still be responsible for their support, even though they are not biologically mine. The court was not concerned with fairness, only with ensuring that the children were cared for. My lawyer convinced me that abandoning my family would only harm the children, and I couldn't do it. I love them, and they regard me as their father. So I made a plan. In the short term, I chose to pretend everything was fine and not reveal what I knew. I estimated that it would take 2 to 4 years to prepare for my long-term goals. What is the long-term plan? So I started transferring money to a separate account, investing wisely in companies such as Tesla, Amazon, and Apple. I built a portfolio worth more than $6 million, and it is still growing. Diane is completely unaware of this money, which serves as my safety net. She has her secrets, now I have mine. My plan was nearly finished, with only another year needed to finalize everything for success. I wasn't looking for vengeance. I had my 4 children to consider, and I didn't want them caught up in the chaos. Following our anniversary trip, I took the children to the annual RV show. They loved it, and were thrilled with the prospect of traveling the country in an RV. I began to think they had a valid point. We brought home a bag of brochures, which the kids spread out on the family room floor to compare options. They all agreed that the Grand Design fifth-wheel trailer, with its bunk beds and 2 bathrooms, was the best option for our family. It was spacious enough to accommodate all of us. I needed a truck to haul it, so I found a new Ford F-250 crew cab. Ideal for the job. After visiting the bank, I left with 2 cashier's checks and purchased the truck. Red is my favorite color. Diane was quite upset. She exclaimed, "John, we were supposed to talk about big purchases like this. What amount did you spend?" Well, I responded that the trailer was around $90,000 and the truck was another $65,000, so the total comes to around $155,000. Not bad. Diane appeared pale and had to sit down. Inside, I was amused. We still need a few things before we can start traveling, but the kids are very excited to get on the road. You've all heard the phrase asterisk quid pro quo, which means something for something. In my case, since Diane had a long-term relationship with Tom, I assumed I could do the same. But I had not. I felt I needed to catch up because I had only recently learned of their affair. I began by putting money into investments that paid off handsomely. Phase 1 of my long-term strategy, Phase 2, was to begin undermining Diane's relationship with Tom. I needed to exert some pressure and make her wonder if I knew what she was up to. The trailer and truck idea came from the kids' desire to travel, so I used it to see if Diane would agree with it or resist purchasing them before telling her. It was a subtle jab, but she deserved it. When I pulled into the driveway with the truck and trailer, the kids were overjoyed. We set up the trailer, extended the slides, and the kids immediately began organizing their bunks. They insisted on sleeping in the trailer that night, so I suggested Diane do the same to test it out. She stayed with me, but I knew it was due to pressure from both the kids and me. We'll see how things progress. The travel trailer and truck were great. The kids had a great time all weekend running around the park, riding bikes, hiking, swimming, and making new friends. We had campfires both nights, and they were reluctant to return home. I could not blame them. Diane, on the other hand, appeared unimpressed with camping, despite the luxury trailer constantly swatting away bugs. I realize time is running out, and I need to address Diane's double life. She has to choose between her longtime boyfriend and me, despite the fact that he is their biological father. I am the one who raised, loves, and cares for the children. I am the father who is always present for them, teaching, comforting, and telling bedtime stories. There will not be another father who simply shows up to sleep with their mother once a week before returning to his own family. No, it's almost time to move forward, have the conversation, and resolve this. A few months later, it was time to begin moving forward. The kids were prepared, as was I. Though I didn't know how prepared Diane would be, her comfortable life was about to change, at least in my opinion. Friday night, I came home to Diane in the kitchen, and the kids scattered throughout the house and backyard. I took a moment to enjoy the scene of domestic bliss, but then my thoughts turned to Diane and Tom, and I realized it was time to act. Diane, I suggested that we get a sitter tomorrow night and go out for dinner and a drink. We need to make some plans, and it would be ideal to do so without interruptions. That sounded great. She responded. We needed some time alone without the kids demanding our attention. I had made a reservation at an Italian restaurant for 7 p.m. At 6:30, the sitter arrived and Diane and I left. I chose a quiet, private table so that we could have our conversation. I knew she wouldn't want to have it after the usual discussion about children and work. I discussed what had been on my mind. Diane, there's something I need to talk about. I know you don't want to talk about this. It's been bothering me for a while. Her expression became serious and she nervously inquired, What is it, John? Sweetie, I'd like to know how long you intend to continue your relationship with Tom. She was stunned, coughing and denying it, but I persisted, asking how long this affair would last. Another year? 5 years? Her reaction was memorable. She turned pale, struggling to breathe, and I worried she'd pass out. I called the waiter, informed him that Diane was feeling ill, and requested the check and a barf bag. We left quickly, knowing it would probably be the last time we ate there. Diane sat silently in the car until she erupted, vomiting all over the parking lot, catching both her and my shoes in the mess. The drive home was quiet. When she arrived, she went straight to the bedroom to clean up, while I assured the kids that she wasn't feeling well. Later, I checked on her and discovered her on the bathroom floor, a mess. I assisted her in undressing and entering the shower before transporting her clothes and shoes to the laundromat. I knew the shoes were beyond saving. Diane stayed in the shower for nearly 40 minutes, most likely reflecting on the previous 10 years with Tom and pondering what she would do next. But it was no longer my problem. This was hers, and perhaps Tom's, but not mine. Diane exited the shower, put on her pajamas, and remained in the bedroom. I went into the kitchen, poured myself an IPA, and sat thinking about the mess we were in. My priorities were clear. The kids first, me second, and Diane last. I slept in the spare bedroom that night and didn't hear anything from Diane. Sunday morning, I got up early, made coffee, and took a cup to Diane. She lay curled up in bed, looking exhausted. Morning, I brought you coffee. I said. She slowly sat up, and I reminded her that the kids would be awake soon and we had things to do. I told her I'd get breakfast started and left her to prepare. Diane had left by the time I returned. The day went on as usual, with Diane driving the kids to their activities, but she was unusually quiet, saying little to either me or the kids. She appeared to have just received bad news, and I was curious how she would handle what came next after the kids went to bed. I expected Diane to speak, but she simply went to her bedroom and closed the door. I overheard her quietly talking on the phone, most likely to Tom. They were busted, and I knew Tom must have been terrified that I'd expose him, but he probably felt safe because money could solve his problems. I poured myself a beer and served Diane a glass of wine. So, when will we talk? I asked, passing her the wine. I don't know what to say, she replied, her voice trembling. Let's start from the beginning. I know you've been with Tom for a long time, longer than we have been married. I feel like an outsider, like you've been lying to me throughout our marriage. I took a sip from my beer. I think about everything we've accomplished together and with the kids. I don't understand why you didn't tell me the truth. If you didn't want me to be their father, why deceive me? You're a good man, a good husband, and an excellent father. Diane spoke, her voice breaking. Yes, I am, but I am not the biological father, I replied. Diane looked at me with tears in her eyes, whispering, I am so sorry I did that to you. Do you love Tom so much that you want him to be their father? I asked. She didn't respond. After a long silence, I inquired, So what is your plan? What would you like to do? Diane remained silent. If you do not have a plan, I do. You may not like it, but it is up to you to choose what you want. I told her I had spoken with the kids and informed them that I had a job opportunity elsewhere. They were eager to move and thanked her. I knew I was endangering her life with Tom, and the prospect of losing him was probably too much for her to bear until I accidentally discovered the truth. I was content knowing that I had 4 wonderful children and a wife who cared for me. But now something had to change. You have a decision to make. I said, Tell me and the kids what you want. Then I got up and exited the room. I believe it is best if you sleep in the spare bedroom, I added as I walked away. Meanwhile, I had my plan, which I named Operation Exodus, or OPX, ready to go. Phase 1 had been in the works for years, accumulating financial resources so that I could do whatever I needed. The main question was whether Diane would try to make amends and stay with the family, or if she would decide to spend her future with Tom. I needed the answer, but I wasn't in a rush. Allow them to sweat a little longer. I intend to continue the silent treatment in order to force Diane to reconsider her actions and keep both her and Tom guessing about my next move. I wanted her to understand that what she did could have consequences for her as well. Most importantly, I was determined to maintain my status as the father of my children. I would not let them be taken away from me. I had the resources to fight and would do whatever it took to prevent Diane from taking them away. It was difficult to tell how much Diane realized the gravity of her deception. She either knew or was still denying how unhappy I was. She needs to make a decision soon, and I may have to push her along. I had a plan for it. 3 months later, Andrea informed me that she wanted to train for a triathlon and requested a new racing bike. We went to the bike shop and found one that was light, fast, and expensive, costing around $2,000 with all the gear. It would cost approximately $3,000. She's a little like me. I used to race mountain bikes when I had the time. Keith wants to play hockey, and his equipment will cost approximately $3,000 this year, not counting high-tech sticks. Laura wants to play soccer, which is fortunately cheaper. Brittany is also interested in playing basketball and taking music lessons. The kids' schedules are overwhelming, and I can't handle it all alone. Diane will need to assist, which may conflict with her time with Tom. Perhaps that is a good thing. My plan to force Diane to choose between Tom and her family was nearly completed. The kids would play an important role, so I began putting things in place. 2 months later, I talked to the kids, and they agreed with my plan. I explained that their mother needed to change and that we should help her make a decision. The kids suggested she quit her job so she could spend more time with them. I assured them that we had enough money and that it was best for her to stay at home as the summer began. I quietly loaded the camper, including Andrea's new bike, and got ready for our trip. The night before we left, I asked Diane if she had made a decision. What's your decision, John? You understand what I am asking. Are you lonely enough in your spare bedroom? You have been there for months. It's time to decide. I walked away. The next morning, after breakfast, the kids and I finished packing the truck and trailer before hitting the road. Diane was not with us. I knew she had made her decision. We left Albany and headed for Canada. Andrea sat in the front, navigating, while the others enthusiastically discussed the campground. A week later, we're at Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada. The scenery here is breathtaking. The kids are having a great time, and we're busy every day with hiking, swimming, and other fun summer activities. We drove to Huntsville to get groceries, and the kids picked up some designer items from a local shop. Popular but expensive, so why not? I haven't turned on my phone since we left, so I'm not sure what Diane is doing. And I don't mind if she's frantic about where we are right now. It's fine with me. Maybe she'll experience the pain I felt when I discovered her lies. It may be cruel, but she deserves it. In a few days, we'll pack up and head east to Nova Scotia. It will take about a week to get there because we only travel 4 or 5 hours per day and then camp for a few days before continuing. I want to take the children to Cape Breton Highlands National Park. I've heard positive things about it and have already made a reservation. It was time to call Diane and confirm that everything was fine. I had Andrea make the call on my phone. I timed it to coincide with Diane's usual time with Tom. My goal was to disrupt things and remind her that her secret was out. Andrea dialed, and after 2 rings, Diane answered. "John, is that you?" Diane inquired, her voice uncertain. "Hello, Mom. It's me," Andrea said. "Andrea. Oh my God, sweetie, are you and your siblings all right? Where are you now?" Diane's voice was filled with concern. "We're great, Mom," Andrea reassured her. "We're having a blast. Keith injured his knee, climbing a mountain. Brittany was stung by a bee, and Dad carried Laura after she twisted her ankle." There was a pause at the other end of the line. Andrea asked, "Mom, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here," Diane replied. "Is Dad there? He's grilling supper." Andrea asked if you wanted to talk to Keith, Laura, or Brittany. "Yes, please," Diane said. "Put them on." The kids took turns telling their mother about their adventures. Eventually, Brittany handed me the phone. I took a deep breath before speaking. "So, how are you, Diane?" I inquired, my voice steady. "Why did you take the children away?" Diane pleaded, "Please come home. Please bring back my children. Diane, I loved you enough to give up everything for you, but now I don't think you care enough to abandon your lover. You are with Tom if you refuse to give him up for us. What are you expecting from me? Think about it. I'll call in a few weeks so we can talk about what it means to be a family. Until then, think about our life and how you deceived me. Consider what steps you can take to make things right, if anything." I hung up without waiting for her response, then turned off the phone. We had supper and a bonfire, roasting marshmallows until the kids were exhausted and went to bed. I sat alone by the dying fire, drinking a beer and contemplating whether I was doing the right thing. My lawyer was prepared to file for divorce and seek sole custody, with sufficient evidence of Diane's affair to persuade any judge. If Diane challenged me with DNA tests, we'd respond with proof of her long-term deception and unfitness as a mother. It could turn ugly quickly, and I wanted to avoid that. I hoped Diane would prioritize her family over Tom, but I wasn't certain. I went to bed, still unsure of how this would all end. Part 2 of my plan was to allow Diane to live life without me and the kids. I knew the last few weeks had been difficult for her, but we would eventually need a permanent solution. My lawyer advised me that Diane might seek a court order to force me to return with the children, so we decided to wait as long as possible. However, before taking legal action, I spoke with Ken about Diane's options. So far, she had only stayed at home, waiting for us to return. My investigator had been monitoring her and reporting back to Ken, who provided me with weekly updates, including information on how frequently Diane and Tom met. Things had calmed down between them, but I knew if I returned, Diane would believe she had won and attempt to resume their affair. That was not going to happen. As the summer came to a close, I knew the kids were eager to get back home and start school. They had countless stories from our travels to tell their friends. It was not fair to keep them away from the campfire any longer. We planned our return trip. We were still in Canada having a good time, but it would take about a week to return home by driving through New England. I considered everything I wanted to say to Diane. I knew she'd be upset because we were gone all summer, but that was too bad. I wanted her to think about how she and Tom had damaged our family. This was only a small amount of retribution, and it was far from sufficient. When we pulled into the driveway in the early afternoon, the kids scrambled out, rushing inside to check their rooms. Diane's car was not there, which was probably a good thing. I unhooked the trailer, cleaned it up, and took a shower. When I noticed the fridge was nearly empty, I asked the kids to bring in food from the trailer while we ate. I heard a car in the driveway and Diane calling for the children. They rushed out to greet her, and she collapsed to her knees in the driveway, hugging them with tears streaming down her cheeks. The children helped her up and led her into the house. "Where is your father?" she asked. Andrea responded, "He's inside the kitchen. We made supper." Diane looked for me as she entered the house. I stayed inside and then quietly went upstairs to get ready. Ready for what? The next part of my plan. I didn't tell anyone where I was going or why. I drove to a city hotel, checked in, and booked a room for 2 weeks to give myself time to find a more permanent place and start dealing with the divorce. I also needed to go back to work, but I realized I'd have to quit soon, even though I liked the job. After unpacking and setting up my laptop, I went out to buy some of my favorite IPA beers, returned to my room, put my feet up, and reflected on all the summer memories with the kids. I wasn't sure what to do with the truck and trailer yet, so I decided to leave them at the house for now and arrange storage later. The next morning, I showed up at the office, half expecting they'd replaced me, but I got plenty of hellos and welcome backs, and it felt like I hadn't been gone for over 2 months. My boss came by looking envious, almost like he wished he'd had a 2-month break. I mentioned considering a big change while traveling over the summer. Naturally, he wanted details, so I floated the idea of working as an independent subcontractor for the company handling project work. We planned to discuss specifics next week, but I knew I could always just quit and start fresh somewhere else if needed. All summer, I funded our travels with money from my secret accounts, not touching our family accounts or credit cards so Diane couldn't track us. My meeting with Ken went well. The divorce paperwork was nearly ready. I knew no court would grant me custody since I wasn't the biological father, and I expected to pay child support for a while. I'd come to terms with not seeing the kids much in the future. I'm not 40 yet, so I figured there was still time to start a new family. I told Ken to serve the papers to Diane at home, sparing her any public embarrassment. And that's exactly what happened. Ken called and said Diane's lawyer wanted me to meet with her before she agreed to sign anything. Damn. I hope to avoid another session in which Diane professes her love but refuses to give up Tom. Ken suggested that I talk to her that night to speed things up, so I agreed. I called Diane and agreed to come over after the kids went to bed. When I arrived around 9 p.m., the house was fully lit, and I could see the kids were still awake. Keith smiled as soon as I rang the doorbell. "Dad, you're home, guys. Dad is at home. Get down here." He jumped into my arms, and it felt amazing to hold him. The other kids came running, hugging me tightly, and I couldn't stop crying. These are wonderful kids, despite everything. Diane stood aside as I spoke with them in the kitchen. After a few minutes, I sent them to bed. "You have school tomorrow." After they left, I sat at the table. "So, Diane, what would you like to talk about?" She poured herself a small glass of wine, sat down, and inquired, "Are you coming home?" I responded with a question. "What made you believe I was coming home?" "John, the kids miss and need you. I miss and need you." She spoke with greater sincerity than before. "You had plenty of opportunities to decide what you wanted. You made your decision long ago, and now I've made mine. I'm guessing Tom has passed you over and is preoccupied with keeping Margaret happy." Diane looked at the table, then back at me. "John, you are the man I want to marry and raise our children with. I love you, and it hurts to see us like this. Can't we work it out? We can seek counseling. I need you and the children. I need you." "Are you finished with Tom?" I asked. "Yes, I am done with him," she stated emphatically. "Do you still work for the company? I quit my job and am looking for a new one." That was the first positive sign in all of this. Diane promised John that I would only be yours forever. Yours. I sat there, overwhelmed with thoughts and emotions. I could not look at Diane or the kitchen. I just closed my eyes and tried to block everything out. I remembered my children's faces, their laughter, and the woman who had once promised me everything. Could I give it up? Where have things gone so wrong? What was my future like without them? I desperately want to undo all the pain. Can I do it, stay or go? But deep down I knew Diane was lying. It was all nonsense. She had chosen Tom for over a decade, and even if they had recently cooled their relationship, it would not last. When I returned, they'd restart. No matter what Diane says, I knew the last part of my plan was essential. It would take time, but it would be worthwhile. 10 years of lies. How much is that worth? So yes, I moved back home. Diane appeared to be as pleased as the children were. She went into overdrive with domestic duties, hoping to demonstrate her ability to be a wonderful mother and wife. Yeah, some may think I'm weak for returning to Diane after learning she's been with Tom since before we met. But think again. What emerges victorious in the battle? Patience and planning. I knew Diane couldn't change. She had taken breaks from Tom before, like when the children were born, but they always came back to him. So what would be the difference now? Nothing. I knew she'd wait until she thought I trusted her before quietly continuing her affair with Tom. So I waited, gathering the evidence I needed to put an end to this sham marriage. I met with both my lawyer and the investigator, and after another payment, the work resumed. I only needed to let nature take its course. And, as expected, Diane and Tom resumed where they left off in just a few months. No time for a patient man with a plan. Diane took a few months off before finding a part-time job that was essentially an excuse to meet Tom. My second meeting with the investigator confirmed that they had resumed using his hideaway, spending parts of 2 afternoons per week together. I knew she couldn't be away from him. It was almost comical when I got home from work and saw her overjoyed demeanor compensating for her guilt. Following an afternoon with Tom, time passed, and I waited for the perfect opportunity to put my plan into action. Meanwhile, I made it a point to have sex with Diane almost every night, except on days when I knew she was seeing Tom. On those days, I was especially nice, the attentive husband. I took her out to dinner, did family activities, gave her flowers and small gifts, and complimented her on her parenting skills. I wanted to lull her into a false sense of security so she would believe she had won. I wanted Diane to see what she had thrown away so she could fully understand the mess she and Tom had made. I wanted her to remember the summer I took the kids to Canada as a small taste of her new life. She could have Tom all she wanted. I wouldn't care anymore. I reminded myself to be patient and wait. Then it is time to act. June. It's the end of the school year. My meeting with the lawyer and investigator is finished. They have prepared all of Diane and Tom's documents. I scheduled for the server to deliver the papers to my house. I told Diane and the kids that we'd be leaving the day after school ended. The trailer was fully stocked with food and supplies, and I told the kids to prepare their belongings for the trip. D-Day. Diane departed for shopping around 8:30. I planned to be out for about 3 hours. Perfect. By 9 a.m., the kids and I had loaded the truck and were on our way to unknown destinations, at least to Diane. Diane usually texts me on my burner phone, which buzzed in my desk. I kept the ringer turned off, but it was quiet and vibrating. I checked the text. I need to see you right away. Meet me at my apartment in an hour. We hadn't planned to meet for a while. Her husband was taking time off to use their camper, and he and the children enjoy traveling. I don't really consider them my children. Sure, I got her pregnant, but that was exactly what she wanted. I know it's weird, but she's fantastic in bed. What does she want now? I arrived at the apartment, grabbed a beer, and waited. Diane rushed in a few minutes later, looking upset and holding a large brown envelope. She tossed it onto the table. Tom, he did it. He left with the children this morning. I was served this, she said, pointing to the envelope. What do I do? She sat down, placed her face in her hands, then stood up, grabbed a glass of wine, and took a big gulp. When she looked at me, I noticed fear in her eyes, which I had never seen before. Usually only lust. I emptied the envelopes onto the table and sorted through the papers. I found the divorce papers and quickly scanned them. They were photos with a note explaining that they were only a sample of what could be used in the divorce process. Diane gave me another envelope with her name on it. Read this, she said. I've read it. Oh, crap. I went back through the divorce papers, found the signature page, and gave her a pen. Sign out, I replied firmly. She began to speak but couldn't finish. You need to sign this right now. If Margaret discovers the truth, John will ruin everything. And your children? She added, they are also yours. I quietly acknowledged, yes, they are. I took a large drink of beer. I realized there was only one way out of this mess. Sign the papers, Diane. If Margaret finds out, my life will be ruined. Her family's political connections would end our business. This would be disastrous. I like my large house and the connections we have. We need to salvage whatever we can. I handed her the pen. John has won. We need to move on. My interest in Diane was fading quickly. I enjoyed having a married woman at my beck and call, and getting her pregnant was exciting. However, she was now becoming a liability. I needed to make sure this didn't go any further. Diane appeared exhausted, but she took the pen and signed the 4 spots before collapsing back into the roadside chair. I know, a cliché, right? The kids are having a great time as we head west. The truck was quiet when we left Albany on the first day. We drove west, hoping to put some distance between ourselves and Albany before stopping. I had reserved a spot at an RV park and we arrived shortly before dinner. Everyone was exhausted, so I quickly connected. The camper got us settled and cooked dinner. That night, we built a campfire, roasted marshmallows, and talked. The kids had a lot of questions about where we were going and what we'd do once we arrived. They deserved answers. I know you're curious about the coming weeks. There will be adventure, hiking bugs, and possibly some cuts and scrapes, I said, looking at Laura and Brittany, who laughed as they remembered our trip to Ontario last summer. I had told Andrea some of the plan because she was the oldest, but now it was time for everyone to know. Do you like horses? I asked. The children erupted in excitement. Well, I paused. What about riding horses on a ranch in West Texas? The children cheered as they ran around the campfire, pretending to be horses. I wasn't sure if this was the right decision. It would be a significant change for each of us. But what was I thinking when I purchased the ranch near San Angelo? It went up for auction, and I bought it for just over $2 million. The house is a large 5-bedroom log home that has been well maintained, but could benefit from some renovations. The land covers over 1,500 acres, so there's plenty of room to explore. There are several outbuildings, and I intend to convert one near the house into a horse barn. A local farmer wishes to graze cattle on the property, which will help to offset some costs. My main concern was finding good schools for the children, but San Angelo, only a few miles away, has everything we need. I still couldn't shake the feeling. West Texas. What was I thinking? 3 months later, in late July, we arrived in San Angelo after a slow, indirect drive from Albany to avoid Diane. I shouldn't have worried. According to my lawyer, Diane signed the divorce papers without issue. She even had her lawyer look over the package I put together, which included the house, all of the furniture, our bank accounts, both cars, and enough money to keep the house for a year. The house was worth approximately $600,000 with a $150,000 mortgage. Diane could sell it and make nearly $450,000. I left her a VW Passat, which would last for a while. I took both the Subaru and the trailer. We packed only what we needed, knowing that we'd get new items in Texas. The divorce settlement also included certified DNA tests, confirming that I was not the children's biological father. I even forced Tom to provide his DNA for comparison. My top priority was to secure sole custody of the children with no visitation rights for Diane if she contested. My lawyer was prepared to reveal everything to Tom's wife and the public, which would ruin him. Tom agreed, and Diane signed everything, including a clause stating that she would never seek financial assistance from me again. She also had to return to her maiden name. This chapter of my life had officially ended. The kids and I were ready to start over. So here I am, not yet 40, with 4 children aged 7 to 12, owning a ranch in West Texas with $7 million in the bank. What do I do? Whatever I want. We moved to the ranch. I had everything set up before school started, and the kids were wonderful. They helped with everything and made this place feel like home. The most memorable day was when we went to a horse ranch to take riding lessons. The kids couldn't contain their excitement. Naomi, the instructor, dressed like a country girl in a checkered shirt, tight jeans, cowboy boots, and a white hat. She's also a veterinarian and a barrel racer, which I had no idea about but was eager to learn. The first riding lesson was enjoyable and a little awkward. Fun for the kids, but awkward for me because I'd never ridden a horse. Naomi chose gentle, well-trained horses for the kids, allowing them to become comfortable before progressing. She then turned to me. "Okay, John, let's meet your horse," she suggested. Me? No. I'm thinking about getting a quad to drive around instead, I protested. She gave me a stern expression. "You can get the quad, but your kids are learning to ride, and you must ride alongside them. Stop arguing and take control. This is Pete. He's about 10 years old and will treat you right if you treat him right," she said quietly. "Besides, the children are watching. You'd better get on the horse." She was correct. I climbed on, feeling out of place with my hiking boots, jeans, and windbreaker. Naomi then suggested we get proper riding gear for the kids and offered to help us shop. When she asked if my wife would be riding, I told her that there was no wife anymore. She nodded, clearly saving that information for later. Grab your belongings and get into the truck. Let's go! I yelled as the kids were running late to school. It's only about a 20-minute drive, and I didn't want them to miss the start of the day. Their school is pretty good, and I've made sure to meet all of their teachers and the principal so they know how to contact me if there is ever a problem. I transformed the old weapon room into a study area and library for them, outfitted with new bookshelves, desks, computers, tablets, and a business-grade printer. It feels like a high-end study hall. The kids don't bother me with homework, and I'm always available to help. We even installed a 65-inch television for streaming educational content, and I upgraded our internet to super-fast fiber optic. In the evenings, I'm busy driving the kids to their various activities, but horseback riding is their favorite. While they're at school, I've been learning to ride by myself. I spend an hour or two at the stables and am becoming more comfortable in the saddle. Even Pete, the horse, appears to notice. Naomi noticed me riding back one day while she was at the ranch to vaccinate some horses. "Look at how confident you are on horseback," she replied with a smile. "Thanks. However, Pete is responsible for the majority of the work," I responded. Naomi asked, "Have you decided when you'll get your own horses?" "I am almost ready. We just need to finish the barn in 2 or 3 weeks. The kids are eager, but I want the barn to be completely prepared when you arrive. Would you like my assistance in finding the right horses for the kids? I assume you'll also receive one." I smiled. "I'd appreciate your assistance. The kids would be ecstatic. Maybe we can talk about it over dinner or a drink. I'd like that. What about this weekend?" "Perfect." I was excited. It wasn't exactly a date, but it would be my first outing with a woman after Diane. We made plans, and Naomi returned to work. The kids teased me about my time with Naomi. I picked her up in my freshly washed and cleaned truck. She wanted something different than the typical Texas barbecue. So we went to an Italian restaurant known for its excellent cuisine and wine. I was nervous when I rang her doorbell, but when she answered, I was floored. She was wearing a dress, her hair down, and she looked stunning. Wow! I told her she looked beautiful and opened the truck door for her. My mother taught me good manners. After some initial awkwardness, we ordered drinks and began talking. We talked, ate, and spoke some more. I limited myself to 1 drink because I was driving, but Naomi had a few more while maintaining her composure. At the end of the night, I received a kiss on the cheek and a thank you for a wonderful evening. When I got home, I paid the neighbor to watch the kids, and then I was bombarded by 4 eager kids who wanted to know everything about my evening with Naomi. The barn should be finished early next week, so Naomi and I will go horse shopping next weekend. John and the kids must have started early on Saturday, as they picked me up around 7:30 a.m. John had a new Suburban that seats 8, and while the kids wanted me to join them, John insisted I sit in the front passenger seat. I had planned a visit to a ranch south of town that is known for selling off a number of young horses each year as part of their breeding operation. The drive was only about 30 minutes, and the kids were excitedly discussing what they wanted in a horse. My role was to help them choose horses. They couldn't handle wild stallions or those that were too tall. We spent the day observing, discussing, and riding horses. We eventually settled on 5 that matched John and the kids' riding solemnity. To celebrate, they invited me to their ranch for a barbecue and a tour of their new horse barn. The kids eagerly showed me around, and I was impressed with the upgrades John had made. The barn featured new walls, a roof, solar power, a backup generator, a tack room, a wash stall, and plenty of hay storage. The LED lighting was set on timers, and each stall had its own water faucet. This was an excellent barn. Following the barn tour, the children led me to the house, which resembled a mansion rather than a cabin, 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a spacious library, and 4 fireplaces. John modestly stated that it needs some work. The barbecue was fantastic, and the children entertained me with their jokes and games. After they had gone to bed, I took John's hand and asked him to show me the master bedroom. We brought glasses of wine, and once the door was closed and the lights dimmed, I removed my boots and jeans. John stepped back, taking in the scenery before slowly unbuttoning his shirt. What followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I was in a great mood after spending time with Naomi. She is incredible. Hands down, the best sex of my life. Despite the fact that I hadn't been with a woman in months, I tried to give her everything I had. Let's get real. Sex with Diane was all about vengeance after learning about Tom, and it lacked genuine passion. But now things were different. It was intense and passionate. Naomi is amazing. I'm not sure if this is just about meeting basic needs or something deeper, but it wouldn't take long for me to fall for her. She's intelligent, talented, resourceful, and attractive. What is not to love? After that, we showered, ate some food, drank some beer, and returned to bed for round 2. Yes, again, I'm smiling as I say that. The next morning, the kids were surprised to see Naomi in the kitchen with me. Andrea gave me a look that said, "What is up, Dad?" However, the others had only recently begun discussing horses and planning when we would bring them to the ranch. Renovations on the house are progressing. We are updating the kitchen and bathrooms as well as installing environmental systems to increase the house's efficiency and reduce its carbon footprint. I own solar panels, a wind generator, and a geothermal heating and cooling system. The well was deepened and widened, and a water storage tank was added for increased capacity and fire suppression. We also had to replace the septic system, and I upgraded the backup generator to work with the new systems and provide uninterrupted power. I've been investing heavily in my home almost as quickly as I'm earning it. That means I've been paying close attention to the stock market. Fortunately, the markets are performing well, and despite the spending, my finances are stable, thanks in part to tax breaks and incentives for solar installations. I'm also putting aside some profits and fixed interest accounts as a safety net in case the market crashes. If things go bad, we can sell a portion of the land and still cover our expenses. So, what is happening to Naomi? That's a fair question. I will let her fill you in on that. Since getting to know John and the kids, I've noticed how close they are as a family. John is an incredible father, and the children are fantastic. They work together as a team, and I have never heard them complain. John and I have had some in-depth conversations about his divorce from Diane. He described how her affair with her old boyfriend continued throughout their marriage until last summer. He also told me how he abandoned her, drove the kids in his large fifth-wheel trailer, and eventually ended up here. It's quite the story. John also revealed that Diane's boyfriend is the biological father of the children, but he is determined to keep them regardless. Diane must be crazy to cheat on John. I can't imagine a better man to be married to. That is why I am patiently waiting for him to ask. My parents are dropping hints about my future, and they've met John and the kids and adore them. My mom adores those children and treats them like royalty. When we visited, my father grilled John with 40 questions over beers several times. My mother has done everything but directly ask when we are getting married. Tonight is the night that I will forever change my life and the lives of my children. I am going to ask Naomi to marry me. It's warm, and I wanted everything to be just perfect. So I invited Naomi's parents to a barbecue to celebrate our new pool. I told the kids about my plan and reminded them not to assume Naomi would agree. Marrying into a family of 5 is a significant step. Even though she spent days at a time with us, living with 4 children full-time will be a significant adjustment. I was nervous. I have been down this road before, and we all know how it turned out. Some may think I'm foolish or oblivious, but I believe Diane and I worked together. If I had known the truth, my life could have been very different. But here I am, a man with 4 kids on a ranch in West Texas, about to propose to a stunning 32-year-old woman. It was time for the kids to help set up the patio, get out the cooler and glasses, and play a special CD. I hid the ring box inside a flower pot. I took Naomi's hand and led her to a chair in the center of the semicircle, with everyone following her. I began. You are probably wondering what I am up to. Naomi smiled and nodded. I continued. Every day since we met, I've grown to love you more. Then I took the ring box, knelt in front of Naomi, and asked, Naomi, will you marry me? She responded. I was wondering when you'd ask John Strickland. Yes, I would love to marry you. I put the ring on her finger and we kissed while her parents and children applauded. Right as they were about to join us, Naomi raised her hand and said, Wait, I have something for you. She took out a small white plastic object from her pocket and gave it to me. I immediately recognized what it was. It's a good thing you proposed because you're going to become a father again. Holy crap. We married and started a new family of 6.5 people. William, our son, was born weighing 7 pounds 11 ounces, and both mother and son are doing well. I am still on cloud 9. The ranch is thriving. We established our own small cattle herd and hired cowboys for daily tasks. Naomi's father has been a tremendous help in establishing the business and is present almost every day. The kids are riding more, and I am becoming more comfortable on a horse. I also purchased a 4-person side-by-side ATV with cargo box and trailer for ranch work. I started a business refurbishing and reselling pickup trucks and farm equipment, employing 3 mechanics from a nearby trade school. Because new equipment is expensive, used equipment is in high demand, and we are filling that gap. I also started a small construction company, hiring 2 carpenters from the community college, and we're doing small jobs to establish our reputation. My father-in-law maintains strict control over the business. If demand increases, I will add another crew. We're all busy developing and becoming members of the community. The doorbell rang, and I went to see who it was, with Brittany by my side. On the video monitor, I noticed a woman around 40, attractive and alone. Brittany tugged on my arm. "Oh, Mom, that is the woman who used to be my mother. I do not want to see her." She quickly exited the foyer and headed to her room. It was Diane. I paused to gather my thoughts before opening the door. She cast a quick glance over me. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Yes, I am looking for John Strickland. I've heard he might live here." "Yes, he does. I am his wife, Naomi Strickland. What do you want with my husband?" She hesitated, then spoke. "I was hoping to speak with him and see my children. You are Diane, right? John is in town and the children are in school. Leave your phone number and he might call you when he gets back. Perhaps I can wait for him. That is probably not a good idea. John has told me about you, and I am confident the kids do not want to see you. You ruined that relationship long ago. I doubt John will want to talk to you either. You worked hard to deceive him, and he has worked hard to move on and become an excellent father. It's best if you return home." As we talked, I kept an eye on her face and hands. This is Texas, and most Texans keep a weapon nearby just in case. I wasn't sure if she was having a breakdown or seeking vengeance. Watching her hands would alert me if she reached for a weapon, in which case I would close and lock the door and grab my own weapon. Our front door is thick and reinforced with a metal plate that can withstand a bullet or rifle blast. The original owner installed it for his family's safety. Growing up in Texas, we had an alarm system with a panic button that called the sheriff. I learned to shoot as a child. My father, a National Guard veteran who served in Iraq, taught me and my brothers to shoot accurately. My #1 priority is to protect my family. We keep 2 weapons in our home, both locked but easily accessible. I was not concerned about Diane. Diane stood there for a moment before beginning to cry. "I really need to speak to him. I'd like to apologize for any pain I've caused him or the children. Why do you think he wants to see you at all? Perhaps he doesn't. Could you please tell him? I'd like to talk for just a few minutes." She handed me a piece of paper containing her phone number and the motel where she was staying. "Please call me at this number. I only want to talk to him for a few minutes." When I returned home with the kids, Naomi informed me that we had a visitor that afternoon, Diane. I couldn't believe she'd discovered us. I didn't want her around or anything to do with her. If she didn't realize it by now, she was obviously delusional. I decided to phone her mother. I hadn't spoken with Diane's family since before I took the kids to Canada a few years ago. I knew they were curious about what happened and where I had gone with their grandchildren. When we left Albany, I let Diane explain things to her family. I didn't care. My only concern was for the safety and well-being of my children. The call proceeded as expected, with lots of shouting, crying, pleading, and some things Diane's mother said that irritated me. She begged to see her grandchildren, and it was clear she didn't realize Diane had left the city to find us. She was also unaware of the extent of Diane's decade-long affair with Tom. Diane had not told her much of the truth. I asked her what she planned to do, but she didn't respond. So I mentioned that I was considering getting a restraining order to keep Diane away. I told her I had a new wife, a new son, and a new life, and asked her to inform Diane that she needed to leave us alone. By the end of the call, I was certain I would not let Diane have any contact with the kids. When they reached adulthood, they were free to make their own decisions. But, until then, I was steadfast in my decision. Naomi agreed with me. The next morning, I called my lawyer in Albany and asked him to contact Tom's lawyer, suggesting that it would be in Tom's best interests to persuade Diane to return to Albany and leave us alone. If Tom fails, there may be consequences. Your imagination can help fill in the blanks. Following the call, Naomi and I devised a strategy to prevent Diane from ambushing the children. I was concerned Diane was experiencing a mental health crisis, believing she could solve all her problems by moving to Texas. Naomi's father even brought some of his weapons as protection. But I assured him that we were well prepared, so he took the majority of them home. After visiting and hugging everyone, particularly our son William, my lawyer gave Tom's lawyer a deadline, and I needed proof that Diane was back in Albany. But I knew I'd have to confront her one final time. The next day, around dinner time, the doorbell rang. It was Diane. Naomi was right behind me, telling me that the kids were in the library but couldn't hear what was going on because the door was closed. I took a deep breath before opening the door. "Hello, Diane." She looked at me, then Naomi. "May I come inside?" I raised my hand to stop her. "If you came here expecting us to return to Albany, you wasted your time. We are not coming back. The children and I have a new life here, and as you can see, Naomi and I are married with a family. I just want to see my kids. That is all I'm asking. People's definitions of vengeance vary. But for me, it was taking the children and abandoning Diane as retribution for her decade of deception. Moving to Texas was an escape from the humiliation of remaining in a lie-filled marriage. I couldn't abandon my beloved children, who saw me as their father and protector. So whatever plan I devised had to include them. I considered it during our trip to Canada and realized when we returned that I needed to act quickly. Diane was standing on my porch asking to see the children, despite signing over custody and the divorce and agreeing to no contact. Why now? Was it regret, remorse, or the recognition that she was no longer a mother to her children? Whatever the reason, it needed to be significant. Why now? Diane, why drive all the way from Albany? Why do you think the kids want to see you after everything you've done? Andrea and Keith understand what you did. Laura and Brittany understand you chose your boyfriend over us. Are you still with Tom? Diane looked down. Tom and I are finished, and how does that affect things here? John, I just want to see the children. I miss them. Please let me see them. I need to think about it and discuss it with the kids. But this is not happening right now. Return to your motel and I will call you. I needed time to figure out what was actually going on. Was she experiencing a breakdown? I thought this would solve everything. Or was she being pushed to do this? I wasn't about to let her hurt my family again. She nodded, gave me the motel's name and phone number, and then walked to her car. My old Subaru. She returned her gaze to the house before getting into her car and driving slowly away. I shut the door as Naomi and I turned around. Andrea was standing behind us. What did she want? That night at supper, I mentioned their mother. The kids stopped eating and looked at me. I informed them that she had asked to see them and asked if they wanted to see her. After a lengthy discussion, we voted. I was not surprised that they all said no. I knew what I needed to do. I called Tom. He was surprised to hear from me after everything that had happened. I had to repeat myself several times before he understood. Tom, your girlfriend showed up on my porch, violating our agreement. Get her out of Texas immediately, but why do you think I can tell her what to do? Wake up. Tom, if you do not get her out of here, I will consider this a breach of our agreement, and your wife Margaret. Remember that she will receive a package of information via courier. Do you enjoy your comfortable life in Albany? Silence. So do you? I'm not sure what you're talking about, John. Grow up. Tom, I will ruin your life, your business, and everything you own. You'll regret ever getting involved with her. You've got 24 hours to get her out of Texas. More silence. Do you understand? He gave a quiet reply. I understand. I gave him the information for Diane's motel. That night, Naomi's parents arrived, and we decided it would be best if Naomi and the children stayed with them until the situation was resolved. We didn't tell the kids much, except that Grandma and Grandpa had invited us over after Naomi and the kids had left. I waited to see what happened. Surprisingly, not much happened. Diane did not return when I visited the motel. The manager informed me that there had been an incident involving a woman from the East, a lawyer, and another man. But they all left soon after. My lawyer called around midnight to say Tom's lawyer had informed him that Diane was on her way back to Albany. Tom guaranteed that she would not bother us again. I later learned that Tom had hired a local lawyer and investigator to locate Diane, then flew to Texas to persuade her to return to Albany. It was the last time I saw her. We all went home in the morning and our lives returned to normal. "Hold on to that horse!" I yelled at Andrea as she practiced barrel racing in the ring with her pony. "Hard, isn't it?" Both she and the horse were learning, and while it would be some time before she was ready for a major competition, she was making excellent progress. Hard left. Now ride hard to the finish line. Not bad for a beginner. Every year the children grow and their schedules become more demanding. John even bought William a pony and takes Will on rides with him. The horse is gentle, knowing that it is being ridden by a toddler. Will is still very young, but I can tell he's going to enjoy riding. As for me, I am not riding right now because I am pregnant again. I still do some veterinary work, but it's tapering off as my due date approaches. Between the kids, the ranch, our businesses, and me, John works long hours at night. He massages my feet and back, and we make love. Sleeping on clothes seems to encourage this behavior. Sorry, but I need to pee again. These twins are constantly pressing on my bladder. Here is the next story. Thursday, January 31st. John Anderson sat at his desk wondering what he would do about Amy. Amy, his wife of 6 years, had recently been acting strangely toward him. She appeared to be preoccupied with something, and he had no idea what it was, for more than a month now. Since Christmas, she appeared to be lost in thought, nearly every evening. Their conversations had deteriorated into simple sentences. They used to have lengthy conversations around the supper table, but these had devolved into little more than question and answer sessions. He asked her what was bothering her, but she never said anything. He knew there was something unusual about her and the way she treated him. He made up his mind. He was going to talk to her about it again tonight, and this time he wasn't going to take no for an answer. As the chasm between them widened over the last few months, he noticed that it was beginning to affect their sex life. They had always been active in this regard, enjoying each other nearly every night. However, it appeared that once a week had become the norm, with no sex life for the last 2 weeks. While he had tried to pique Amy's interest, she had repeatedly made excuses, most recently complaining about being too tired last night. He found it difficult to believe given that they were both only 30 years old and in excellent physical condition. Amy had been studying art in the evenings at the local university for the past 5 months. These classes were held on Monday and Wednesday evenings, and he had noticed that they were taking longer lately. She had said she needed to work on her paintings several times in the last month, and she had been gone for several hours on each occasion. Fortunately, his work did not conflict with her university hours, and he was able to care for their 1-year-old daughter, Amanda, while Amy was at class. John sat back in his chair, closing his eyes. He reflected on the years since he and Amy had graduated from university. He had a business degree, and she had a general arts degree. He had used a small inheritance to start his own printing business. He saw a need for such a business in Ellisville, so it was doing reasonably well, and Amy had worked with him on it for a while. However, she preferred to paint or sketch instead. They had built her a studio in one of their spare bedrooms, which she had filled with her work and supplies. When she felt the need to broaden her artistic experience, he suggested she take some of the university's evening courses. It seemed to work out well for her, as he noticed new subjects and mediums in her work. She had recently started using pastels, and he noticed her work had a new feel to it. Her skills had greatly improved. He could never seriously discuss her art with her because he wasn't as into it as she was. While he appreciated her work, he couldn't engage her in a conversation about painting techniques or styles, as his business expanded and her art evolved. They had less in common to talk about, though Amanda's arrival had helped significantly. She was their pride and joy. Amanda's abilities and appearance changed frequently at the age of 1. For the past month, he had wondered if Amy was having an affair. Many of the warning signs he'd read about were present, but his 2 attempts in the last 2 weeks to catch her if she was out to play him had yielded no results. He had dropped Amanda off with his in-laws, Fred and June Holmes, both times. telling them he had work to do at the office, but instead he had gone to the university to see if Amy was actually in class. The first time was during one of her regularly scheduled classes, and he saw her working at her easel with 4 other students in class. 2 of the students were female. The first was an elderly man, and the last was a young teenage boy. Their instructor appeared to be around 40 years old, bearded, dressed drably, and had a plain appearance. The second time he checked on her, she said she was going in to finish her latest painting. He could see into the room through the partially open classroom door, and she was working on a painting, just as she had said she would. The art professor had been standing beside her, pointing at her work and apparently discussing something with her. John hung around and checked on her several times, but he found nothing suspicious. He sat there, wondering what he could do to fix something he wasn't even sure was broken. Mary called him on the intercom to let him know his wife was on line 1. He had hired Mary Page, a 50-year-old widow, only 2 weeks before, and her worth was already being demonstrated. She had been able to relieve him of the responsibility of answering the phone, and she was now in charge of the customer counter. This allowed him to focus on pricing orders and calculating estimates, designing printed products for his customers, and ordering the supplies and equipment his shop required. Mary had demonstrated excellent public relations skills and quickly grasped the vast array of product options available through this company. Now that the post-Christmas lull in business had passed, he would be able to put her skills to good use. John reached for the phone, pressed the flashing button, and asked, "Hello, dear, how are you? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, John. I just want to know if you will be home at your usual time tonight." "Oh, I should be, honey. Everything is under control here, especially now that Mary works in the office for me." "That is good. John, I need to talk to you. I'll see you at 515 then. Goodbye." "Goodbye, dear. I will see you at 515. Love you," he said, realizing that she had hung up too soon to hear his final thoughts. He sat with the receiver in his hand, wondering how she could hang up so quickly and impersonally. This appeared to be just another example of how she had changed in only a few months. They would have spent as much time as they could talking and teasing each other on the phone. She didn't appear to be the same woman she was just a short time ago. John picked up one of the photos on his desk. It was taken last year while they were vacationing in Florida. They were on the beach and had asked a lifeguard to take their picture. They stood with their arms around each other, Amy resting her head on his shoulder. He marveled at her beauty, her dark blonde hair contrasting with his dark brown. They were both fit and had no extra weight on them. The photo didn't make it clear that she was 4 inches shorter than his 5'10". The photo wasn't large enough to see her blue or his hazel eyes, but they both had broad smiles that no camera could miss. He stared at the photo, remembering how well things had gone for him and Amy during their first 5 years of marriage. During those years, they made 2 major trips, one to Cancun and one to Fort Lauderdale. Although these trips were filled with days of sunbathing, swimming, snorkeling, and relaxing on the beach or by the pool, the nights were filled with romantic dinners and dancing, followed by hours of joyful lovemaking. Almost every night when they returned to their room, they would repeat the same basic script. The door was quickly closed and the deadbolt locked. Then they'd start undressing each other. They both won the race. When they returned home, their lovemaking became more limited, but at least once a week, they would mirror their nights on vacation. John thought their sex lives had been nearly perfect and couldn't understand what was going wrong in this aspect of their relationship. It was beyond his comprehension how it had deteriorated from such joyful lovemaking to a non-existent physical relationship. He could only wait until tonight to insist that she talk about their problems with him. The ringing of the telephone interrupted John's thoughts. He sat up, placed the photo back on his desk, answered the phone, and returned to work. His problems with Amy would have to wait until he arrived home. Right now, his business required him. Shortly before the end of the business day, there was a knock on John's office door. He looked up to see Mary and his only other employee, Frank Worth, enter the office. Frank oversaw all of the printing operations, including the copiers, colladas, cutters, laminating machines, and offset printing machine. Mary said, "John, we have a problem." "What up?" We just received a rush printing job and there won't be enough time to complete it before we close. The customer requires the order for first thing in the morning, so we wondered if he'd be willing to stay and finish the job. Mary, I simply cannot stay tonight. I have some important things to do at home right after I finish work. Frank, is it possible for you to stay for a few hours of overtime to finish this job? Well, I suppose so, John. I don't like working extra hours, but since it hasn't been required very often, this time should be fine, Frank said. My wife is exhausted by the kids and eagerly awaits my return home to provide some relief. Thanks so much, Frank. I appreciate it. John cleared the remaining jobs from his desk and placed several files in his briefcase. It was 10 a.m., and if he left now, he'd get home a few minutes early. He was eager to speak with Amy and resolve their issues, and as he hurried out the door, he said a quick goodbye to Mary and Frank. At 5 o'clock, he pulled into his driveway, grabbed his briefcase, and entered the kitchen through the garage door. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed Amy standing at the sink, staring out the kitchen window. She turned to face him as he set his briefcase down and walked towards her. "Hello, honey. I managed to leave a little early." As he approached Amy, he embraced her and leaned forward to kiss her. As he did this, she turned her head so that his lips found her cheek rather than her lips. She pushed his arms away from her, saying, "Please, John, do not do that. I need to talk to you." Amy turned away from him and entered the living room. John followed her with a puzzled expression on his face, because her actions made no sense to him. She sat in a chair, that faced their sofa, and said, "John, sit down. I want to talk to you, and it has to happen now." John sat on the sofa, puzzled expression on his face, waiting for Amy's next words. She held her hands in her lap and kneaded one with the other. She turned to face the floor and began speaking. "John, I am leaving you. No, that is not quite right. I am divorcing you." John jumped to his feet and asked, "What?" "Amy, you are divorcing me. How do you say that?" "John, please sit down. What?" "I'm going to explain to you that things are already difficult. Please sit there while I say what I need to say. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for days, and I need to do it right now." Amy stated, "While taking this art course, I've realized that while I love you, I love Peter even more. Maybe it's not that I love him more, but that we're much better suited to each other. Aside from art, we share many interests. We share a love of literature, music, and the performing arts. Anything I've ever said to him about any of these topics has exactly matched his feelings. He is leaving for Paris at the end of the semester, and he wants me to accompany him as his wife. That will occur in 4 months at the end of May. So I'd like to be divorced from you by then so that we can marry before leaving for Paris." "You're referring to Peter Bridges," your professor John said. "Do you want to leave me for him? How do you even say that? After all, we have meant something to each other. You want to end our marriage because he shares your opinions? Why do you think I would agree to this?" John had stood up and was now pacing back and forth in front of the couch. He returned to Amy, his eyes glistening with tears as he waited for an answer. "I'm sorry, John, but I need to do this for myself. Don't get the impression that I haven't given this much thought. Aside from his love for me, he's my mentor and muse. He has helped me realize that my art is a reflection of who I am. I need to go to Paris to find out how good I can be." Amy raised her head to look at John, her eyes filled with tears. John resumed his pacing, then walked behind the sofa and rested his arms against it. "Have you spoken with anyone else about this? How about your parents? Have you told them about your plans?" Amy resumed kneading her hands together and said, "I just came from my parents' house. I explained everything to them, but they did not take it well. Mom called me a foolish girl, and Dad said if I left, he would have nothing to do with me. Even Babs will not speak to me." She dashed into her bedroom, locking the door. I had hoped they could have understood. How can you expect anyone to understand this? It makes absolutely no sense. John returned to the front of the sofa and fell rather than sitting down again. "Damn it, Amy! How can you do this to us?" he shouted. Amy flinched in her seat and dropped her head again. "John, I have made up my mind over the last 3 days. I packed up my studio and moved everything to Peter's apartment. Most of my clothes are now there, and I only have these 2 suitcases by the door to take with me when I leave. I don't want you to sell the house, and I don't need any of the furniture because Peter already has a furnished apartment. I am also leaving you the car. His apartment is near the university, and if necessary, I can use his car in exchange for leaving everything with you. I drew down $20,000 on our bank line of credit. That seems more than fair to you. I'll need the money to set up a studio in Paris." "Oh my God, you're serious," John exclaimed. "How did you get an additional $20,000 on our line of credit?" "Last month I maxed it out on the new copiers. The account is in both of our names, and I was able to raise the limit after speaking with the manager," Amy explained. John leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He remained silent for about half a minute. "You spoke quietly, without looking at Amy. How about Amanda? If you believe I will let you take her to Paris without fighting you every step of the way, you are greatly mistaken. I will not allow my daughter to be taken away and out of the country for such a foolish whim as this." Amy, too, remained silent for an extended period of time and spoke with the same quietness as John. "John, I will not be taking Amanda with me. I am going to give you primary custody of her. I'd like to spend time with her every week until we leave, and then fly back to see her here every few months. We can figure out the details." John's head snapped up to look at Amy as she spoke. He had an incredulous expression on his face, and when he spoke, his amazement was clear. "You are granting me custody of Amanda. Why would you relinquish custody of your daughter so easily? What is happening here? I adore Amanda and will miss her dearly, but Peter says that pursuing my destiny will not allow me to devote the time that Amanda deserves. Peter is uncomfortable around children, and I'm afraid Amanda won't fit into his plans." Amy stated, "I don't think you are the same Amy." "I knew just a few months ago that Amy would fight for Amanda until her last breath," said John. "Why do you think this has been so hard for me? I'll be leaving a big piece of my heart with you and Amanda. I believe you will be leaving a significant portion of your soul behind." John was crying now, leaning back on the sofa and letting the tears stream down his cheeks without shame. Amy picked up her purse and took out her phone. She typed in a number and said, "You can come by and pick me up now. I am ready." They sat there in near silence, with the only sound coming from John's crying. After about 5 minutes, a car horn gave a short toot, prompting Amy to stand and walk to the front door. "I am leaving now. I'll have my lawyer send you the papers on Monday. Amanda is with my parents, and I have asked them to bring her home to you at 7 o'clock. John wiped his eyes and got up. He walked to the front hall where Amy was standing, and then watched as she picked up 2 large suitcases and walked out the door. As she walked down the front stairs, John walked towards the open front door. Peter Bridges was walking up the front walk when he met Amy near the bottom of the stairs. He took one of Amy's suitcases and smirked at John as she walked to his car. He took a moment to turn and follow her. They put the suitcases in the trunk, got into the car, and drove away. Amy didn't look back. John began crying again as he slowly closed the front door. He walked back to the sofa, sat, and leaned back. He asked himself, "What has happened to my life?" His tears stopped after a few minutes, and he just sat there with his eyes closed, reliving everything that had happened since he returned home from work. He had lost track of time and was still sitting there when the doorbell rang. For a brief moment, he assumed it was Amy returning to inform him that everything had been a terrible joke. But as he opened his eyes, his father-in-law opened the unlocked door and walked inside. Fred Holmes noticed John seated on the sofa and said, "I see she's told you. I am ashamed to call her my daughter. I don't understand how Amy could have fallen for that guy." As he approached the sofa, his wife June and daughter Barbara entered through the front door. Barbara was carrying Amanda, while June held the diaper bag and some of Amanda's favorite toys in her arms. All 3 of them had somber expressions, and John could tell from their red eyes that June and Barbara had cried. Only Amanda was laughing and giggling. She had no idea what was going on. As John stood, all 3 reached out to give him a hug of encouragement. He greatly appreciated the Holmes family's support, as he had no siblings, and both his parents had died within the last 2 years. These people were all he had. The 4 of them sat down and talked about everything that had happened, including what Amy had said to each of them. At various points during the afternoon, neither of them could believe what had happened. Each of them cried more tears. June got up around 7:30 and said, "I think we all need to eat something." I'll head into the kitchen and see what I can find for us. Barbara approached John with Amanda and allowed him to hold his daughter. Amanda squirmed and wanted to pull on her father's hair. She didn't seem to notice the tear streaks on his face. John sat on the sofa and allowed Amanda to play in his lap. Barbara sat by his side, trying to entertain her 1-year-old niece, while Fred joined his wife in the kitchen to help her prepare sandwiches and soft drinks for the 4 of them. In less than 10 minutes, they were all seated around the coffee table, eating the quickly prepared meal. John didn't have much of an appetite, but he ate anyway. He sat there and looked around at the Holmes family. Fred and June were in their late 50s with some gray in their brown hair, both retired within the past year. Fred works in banking management, and June teaches. Both were in good shape for their age, and they spent the majority of their time gardening and golfing, with occasional weekend trips in their motorhome. Barbara was 16, now with only a few years of high school left to complete. She wore her light brown hair in a ponytail, and her smile revealed that she had a full set of braces on her teeth. John knew she was self-conscious about her braces and noticed that she rarely smiled so that her braces were visible, instead giving small smiles with her lips closed. He knew she would mature into a beauty because she already had many of the Holmes women's natural good looks. After eating, the entire group sat quietly around the coffee table. Amanda was crawling between John and Barbara when she finally made it to the edge of the coffee table and, after 2 failed attempts, stood and held it. She was giggling, cooing, and looking around at everyone. When she attempted to take one of the plates, Barbara quickly told her no. Amanda was quick to repeat Barbara's knowledge and soon began playing a game with her. Watching Amanda's antics soon put everyone in a better mood, though the events of the day remained on everyone's mind. Before they knew it, it was 8:30, and Barbara offered to help Amanda get ready for bed. While she was doing that, John. Fred and June sat in the living room, discussing what John would need to do to balance his job and caring for Amanda. They decided he'd have to find a good daycare center, but June would look after Amanda until he did. Because the next day was Friday and John had a lot of work to do, he decided to take the majority of the day off and do everything from home. June would come over in the morning to assist him with Amanda and any other matters that arose. Barbara returned to the living room and informed them that she had changed Amanda for the night and that she was already asleep. John thanked her and praised her childcare skills. After a few more minutes of conversation, the Holmes family decided it was time to leave, and John expressed gratitude for their kindness and assistance. He locked the door behind them when they left. John checked on Amanda, and seeing that she was sleeping, decided he needed a stiff drink to calm his nerves and prepare him for spending the night alone in his bed. He poured about an inch of Glenfiddich into a tumbler and sat at the kitchen table drinking it. The more he thought about what Amy had said, the angrier he became. He wasn't going to make her decision any easier after she had destroyed his world. He wasn't going to cooperate. He finished his first drink and poured himself another. By the end of the second, he could feel the scotch's effects. He went upstairs to the master bedroom and turned on the lights. This was the first time he had been in this room since Amy had left, and he only now noticed the open, empty closet where she had kept her clothes and shoes. Her makeup dresser was bare, and as he walked across the room to check their attached bathroom, he noticed that it, too, held none of her belongings. He returned to the doorway, turned off the light, and fell across the bed. As he lay there, the tears returned, and he became aware of the empty feeling inside his chest. Amy was gone, and he doubted he'd be able to get her back. He felt compelled to try, but lying there in the dark, alone, his confidence was incredibly low. Friday, February 1st. The scotch eventually did its job, and he fell asleep. It was a restless sleep, and he hadn't bothered to undress or brush his teeth before flopping across the bed. Not a very comfortable one, either. He woke up early. I got up, undressed, and went in to take a nice hot shower. When he finished shaving, brushing his teeth, and combing his hair, he felt completely alive again. However, since he awoke, he had been wondering how he would live without Amy. When he got dressed, he went in to check on Amanda, who was still asleep with her arm around her favorite teddy bear. God, he thought, if he lost both her and Amy, he'd have no reason to live. How could Amy consider isolating herself from this precious child? He couldn't. for the life of him. Understand? He leaned over and kissed her on the cheek before going downstairs to see what food was available for Amanda. John made himself coffee and while drinking it discovered infant cereal and some strange fruit for Amanda. He wasn't hungry, but he knew he needed to eat so he could care for Amanda and himself. He poured himself a bowl of cold cereal and sliced a banana over it as he ate and drank his coffee. He couldn't stop thinking about Amy and what he could do to change her mind. He knew he needed to get his mind off of this, so after finishing his meal, he grabbed his briefcase, took out some of the work he had brought home, and sat at the kitchen table to finish it. He finished 3 of the jobs before hearing sounds from upstairs, indicating Amanda had awoken. He went upstairs, changed her diaper, dressed her for the day, and brought her down to breakfast. He placed her in her high chair, fed her cereal, and reached for her bowl of pureed apples. Amanda appeared to realize her father was feeding her at that point, and she began to look around and cry. John knew she was looking for Amy, but he didn't know what he could do to calm her. For the next few minutes, they both shed a few tears before John was able to divert her attention with one of her favorite toys. Once Amanda was satisfied, John allowed her to sit in her chair and play. He called the office and left a message on the machine asking Mary to call him as soon as she arrived. He spent the next hour playing with Amanda until just before 9 o'clock, when Mary called him back. He explained to her that he would be working from home for the majority of the day, but would return to the office for a few minutes later. He instructed her to call him at home if any emergencies arose. He didn't tell her what happened. June arrived a few minutes later and took over Amanda's care while he finished up the work he had brought home. By 10 o'clock, he had finished everything he could do and went to join June and Amanda in the living room. As he flopped onto the sofa, June looked at him and said, "You don't look like you slept well last night. I know we didn't, so I can only imagine what your night was like. I was able to sleep, but only because I had a couple of extremely stiff scotches. I got up early, and after much thought, I decided I needed to get through this for Amanda's sake," said John. "I'd even take Amy back right now for Amanda, despite the fact that she's probably already had sex with him. I'd willingly give up my pride to put an end to all of this, but I doubt she'd even consider returning. She acted as if she had jumped off a cliff without a parachute and was completely confident everything would be fine." June paused for a moment before saying, "She told me a few things that I didn't tell you last night. She stated that she had sex with him several times in the past 2 weeks. She claimed that was why she cut you off from being with her. She did not want to humiliate you by revealing herself to both of you." After another delay, June resumed. "She had a difficult time telling me these things, so I believe her. She claimed you were a much more considerate lover, and her reason for leaving you was not sexual, or that he was a better lover. Do you understand what I am saying, John? Do not think that this is because you failed to satisfy her." That question had occurred to me. June, it hadn't started eating at me yet. I'm sure it could have, though, so I'd appreciate your feedback. However, I believe it reduces the likelihood that she will change her mind. Look, June, I am going down to the office for a while. It will occupy my mind, and I cannot let my business fail, or Amanda and I will have a serious problem. Amanda has been good since you arrived, but I expect her to have a bad time at lunch when Amy isn't here to feed her." John stood and took a long look at Amanda, who had crawled to the sofa and pulled herself up to a standing position. Her pride in her accomplishment was evident in the large smile she gave the 2 adults. John picked her up for a hug and kiss before returning her to her previous location. After picking up his briefcase, John paused at the door to say and wave goodbye to Amanda, as he had many times before. As he turned and left the house, she responded with a big grin and a vigorous wave of her arm up and down. He told himself that he needed to make sure Amanda got through this okay. When John entered the office, Mary was on the phone, so he went directly to his desk. He shut the door on his way into his office because he knew he needed some time to get off the emotional roller coaster he had been on during his commute. He'd had far too much time to reflect on Amy's shocking revelation from the previous night. He was once again in tears. After regaining control, he called Mary in and handed her the files he had finished at home for her and Frank to process. She gave him an odd look when she entered the office, so he assumed she knew he was upset about something. After some thought, he decided to call her in and explain the situation. When Mary entered his office, he asked her to close the door and offered her a seat. It was difficult, but he eventually said, "Mary, I'm afraid I'm not going to be very dependable for the next while. I have a serious situation at home that I'm not sure how to handle. My wife announced last night that she was leaving, but not with our daughter. I appear to have become a single parent. I know you've only been here for 2 weeks, but you're clearly in charge of your responsibilities. I would like to make a new arrangement with you. In addition to your other duties, I would like you to become my office manager. For the time being, it would equate to a $50 raise, and we could talk about how things work out in a month or so." "I'm not sure what to say." "This is quite surprising," Mary said. "I'm not scared of the job because I've previously worked as an office manager. I only hope I can complete it to your satisfaction. I could definitely use the extra cash." John smiled and told her, "I'm sure you can handle it. I know it will be difficult for me to continue doing my previous work while also caring for my daughter Amanda. I need to succeed at both jobs. I don't consider failure an option for me." They shook hands on their new agreement, and John went outside to explain the situation to Frank. Frank expressed surprise at the turn of events in John's life and offered to assist as much as he could. John returned to his office and worked until mid-afternoon, at which point he took all of the files that required his input and left for the day. Before leaving, he asked Mary to call him on his cell phone. If anything came up that she couldn't handle, he assured her that he trusted her judgment and would accept her business decisions as good faith. When he got home, June informed him that Amanda was taking an afternoon nap and that he had been correct in predicting that she would fuss for Amy at lunchtime. It took half an hour to calm her down this time. John had a small den just off the living room, so he took his briefcase full of work with him. He had a small desk with a computer in the room, and by rearranging things, he was able to free up enough space to complete the work he had brought home. He realized that if he was going to do a lot of work from home, he needed a bigger desk, a better computer, and the ability to connect to his office computers from home. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly for John, but at 4:30 he decided to leave work for the day. June had started supper for him while she was watching Amanda, and he helped her finish the meal preparations. June stated, "I'm sort of obligated for a flower show this weekend, John, so I was wondering if it would be okay to have Barbara come over for the weekend to help you with Amanda." "Oh, no problem, John. You don't believe she would mind?" "She will certainly not mind." John said, "She loves Amanda and thinks you're great. I'll ask her to come over around 9 a.m. and bring what she needs for the night. That way, we won't have to transport her back and forth." After June left, John fed Amanda and himself. Amanda's behavior was the same as in the morning, crying and looking around for her mother. Again, John was successful in distracting her. Their evening was quiet, and John bathed Amanda before putting her to bed. She cried again for her mother. After she fell asleep, he poured himself a stiff scotch and sat in the living room to drink it. He sat there thinking about Amy and everything that had happened. He didn't go to bed until midnight. Monday, February 4th. John awoke early on Monday morning, and while drinking his coffee, he reflected on the events of the previous weekend. Barbara had arrived early Saturday morning with a small suitcase, and he had shown her the guest bedroom that she could use. It was across the hall from Amanda's room, next to the bathroom. He told her she could use the bathroom because he had one for himself, accessible only from the master bedroom. When Amanda awoke, Barbara eagerly took over her care, dressing her and feeding her. John decided he needed to upgrade his den for office use, so he spent the majority of the day purchasing a desk, a high-end computer, and other office supplies. He removed the old equipment from the den, as well as several chairs and other furniture, to make it look like an office. He arranged for the hardware and software required to connect to the office computer system to be installed on Tuesday. By noon on Sunday, he had completed all of his work tasks, allowing him to spend the rest of the day with Amanda and Barbara. They went to the park and spent the afternoon walking through the pathways with Amanda in her stroller. It had been a pleasant experience that allowed John to forget about his other problems. Amanda threw a major tantrum twice over the weekend because her mother was not present. Barbara, on the other hand, had managed to keep Amanda under control by keeping her busy. June had picked up Barbara on Sunday evening and promised to be back Monday morning so John could return to work. She arrived at 8 a.m. while Amanda was still sleeping, and John left for the office. John had been busy all morning but was interrupted at 11 o'clock by Mary, who brought him a courier envelope. She recognized the sender and gave John a concerned look as she passed the envelope. The name of a law firm appeared in the upper left corner. John examined the envelope for nearly a minute before opening it. Finally, he ripped open the envelope and took out the pages. He quickly read them and saw that they accurately reflected the terms. Amy had agreed. It also stated that she wanted to spend the entire day with Amanda on Wednesday, each week with a full week every 3 months, dates to be determined later. After carefully rereading the pages, John placed them in his briefcase. He knew he should contact his lawyer, but he had no desire to do so today. He was already dreading seeing Amy in person again on Wednesday. I have been without her for a few days. He missed her terribly, and he knew that when she left the house on Wednesday, it would be like she had abandoned him all over again. The rest of Monday and Tuesday flew by. On Wednesday morning, John awoke earlier than usual to ensure he could leave. When Amy arrived at 8:30, the front doorbell rang and he braced himself as he answered it. Amy was facing the street when he opened the door, so he simply said, "Come in. Amanda is still sleeping. I'll be leaving now." He turned back to the kitchen, picked up his briefcase, and exited through the side door to the garage. He was relieved he didn't have to talk to Amy because he knew he would have broken down in front of her. John felt like Wednesday was the slowest day of his life. All he could think about was Amy, and now he was hiding in his office, planning how to avoid her when he got home. The hole she had ripped in his heart had reopened this morning, and he could barely stand it. Twice the tears had begun, and he began to wonder if he should seek counseling for what he suspected was a serious case of depression. Finally, at 4:30, he decided what to do and called home. When Amy answered, he said, "I'll be there around 5 o'clock. I believe it is best if you simply leave by the front door when I enter through the side. I don't think I'm up to dealing with you in person today." Amy's only response was, "All right." John's arrival at home went exactly as he had requested. Amanda's playpen had been set up in the living room, and she was inside when he arrived. He heard Amy close the front door as he closed the side door through the living room window, and he saw her walk to a parked car on the street and drive away. John and Amanda's supper did not go well. Amanda had eaten everything he had fed her after cooking a meal he had been unable to eat, but as soon as her meal was finished, she began crying and looking for her mother again. This was the most upsetting episode for John yet, and nothing seemed to console Amanda. Her crying continued until she had trouble breathing. John had been holding and rocking her the entire time, and he was upset about the effects on Amanda. When she finally calmed down, he bathed her and put her to bed. He sat beside her until she fell asleep. His nightly ritual of a glass of scotch, followed by several hours of thought, was repeated this night. This time it was nearly 1:30 before he went to bed, but he knew what he had to do for his own and Amanda's sake. He'd contact his lawyer in the morning. Thursday morning he called his lawyer and was able to schedule an afternoon appointment. He took Amy's lawyer's envelope with him and handed the pages to his own lawyer, Bob Taylor, shortly after 2 o'clock. Bob read them over and said, "Well, this appears to be pretty cut and dried. I don't believe there is anything here to argue about. She has asked for far less than the 50% she would normally receive. She is not requesting personal support, and leaving Amanda with you eliminates the need for child support." "I understand," said John. "I've decided, however, that there are some changes I'm going to insist on if she wants this divorce to be completed quickly. Yesterday was her first visit with our daughter, and the emotional turmoil it caused Amanda and me is something I don't want to go through every week until she leaves. It will be even worse if she returns every 3 months and wants to spend the entire week with Amanda. As a result, I am requesting that you send the following letter to her lawyer. She is to relinquish all parental rights to Amanda. She will not see her again before leaving the country. She is not to return frequently, expecting to see Amanda. She is not to contact me personally again, and she is to sign a legally binding agreement to stay at least 500 feet away from Amanda and myself. I'd like to emphasize that I will fight her divorce application for as long as I can." "If she doesn't agree to my terms," said John. Bob looked at John incredulously. "You can't expect her to agree to those terms, do you? She will if she wants a divorce within 4 months. John said firmly. So, I'll prepare a letter this afternoon and have it delivered by courier in the morning. But do not say I didn't warn you. With all of the favorable terms she has already given you, I can't believe these demands will be met. You may be correct, but we will see. I am serious about this. If she wants to destroy our family, that's one thing. But to keep doing it every week is unacceptable to me, said John. John left the lawyer's office and returned to his own business. He felt better by the end of the day. His thoughts were now being written down. He heard nothing else that week, and because the weekend arrangement with Barbara went so well the previous weekend, he suggested it to June again. Barbara was fine as long as she was agreeable, and they had another enjoyable weekend together. Barbara had brought her homework with her this time, and John spent some time helping her with it while Amanda napped. He had been able to help her overcome some difficulties in geometry and algebra, which she considered a fair trade for her babysitting services. Today is Tuesday, February 12th. John's week had begun routinely, at least with regard to the new routine he had established. He'd been able to work from home for parts of the previous day, thanks to the new computer network that connected his home and office. Mary was doing well as his office manager, and had rarely needed to call him at home. Some questions had been answered via email between the two of them, and he was able to send and receive quotes and orders. The pace of work in his business had increased, and all three of them were busy every day. Just before noon, John received a call from Bob Taylor asking him to attend a meeting at 2 p.m. When John walked into Bob's office, his lawyer smiled and said, "I'm not sure how you do it, but she agreed to all of your terms." In all of my years as a lawyer, I don't recall ever seeing a divorce party agree to such serious terms so quickly. Her lawyer has told me that all of the signed documents will be delivered later today. So assuming that happens, I believe we should have you sign your agreement to everything. I'll send your signed copies to her lawyer once we get everything from them. As I previously stated, I am taken aback by her agreement, but the reasons for it are beyond my scope. John signed wherever Bob told him to and was out of his office in less than 30 minutes. He, too, was surprised by Amy's agreement, but he was also relieved. Perhaps now he and Amanda could move on with their lives and get off the emotional roller coaster. He left the office early after telling Mary that he would work from home for the rest of the day and would test his ability to work from home for the rest of the week. Working from home for the rest of Tuesday went smoothly. However, nothing changed over the next 3 days. He had told June that he would try to handle things on his own, but he quickly realized that the conflict between Amanda and his work was greater than he had anticipated. It appeared that whenever he became preoccupied with a file, Amanda had decided to fall and bump her head, or needed to change, or was hungry. Tasks that required a lot of attention couldn't be put off for later. He realized he'd have to devise another plan. He made it through Friday evening without losing any customers, but after putting Amanda to bed, raiding the Glenfiddich bottle, and making himself comfortable, he decided to consider how he could better balance his roles as a business owner and single parent. The answer came to him quite easily. He felt that in order to make everything work, he needed to visit his in-laws over the weekend and see what they thought of his idea. He went to bed feeling better than he had in previous days. On Saturday morning, after he and Amanda had eaten, he called June to see if they would be busy in the afternoon. When told that they had no plans, he informed them that he and Amanda would be arriving around 2 o'clock, as June had not seen Amanda in several days. She invited them to stay for supper, and John gladly accepted. When John arrived at 2 o'clock, Barbara greeted them at the door and immediately took charge of Amanda. When John saw that, he smiled to himself because it was appropriate for what he was about to suggest to this family. He joined Fred and June in the living room and accepted their offer of a cold beer. When they were all at ease, he began to tell them what had happened over the last few days. Fred and June were both shocked and upset to learn that Amy had given up all parental rights and would no longer see Amanda or John. They both thought that was very unlike Amy. John agreed, but explained why he felt he needed to insist on these terms. Finally, they understood his point and agreed it was for the best. "Now," said John, "comes the real reason I wanted to speak with you this afternoon. On Thursday and Friday, I realized that I would be unable to run a business while also caring for Amanda full-time. One or the other will suffer. I can't afford to lose my business, and Amanda deserves a good upbringing. I've considered daycare, And if what I'm about to suggest isn't appealing to you, I'll pursue that option. You've both been retired for a few years now, and you've mentioned several times that once Barbara finishes her education, you'd like to travel around the continent in your motorhome. I propose that Barbara, if she agrees, move into my home and act as Amanda's nanny. This would only apply to the hours when Barbara is not attending school or participating in after-school activities. John shifted in his seat, clearly enthusiastic about his idea. I'd start working from home during the day, but only for emergencies that needed immediate attention. The remainder of my time would be dedicated to Amanda. I believe my staff can handle almost any normal workday situation. After Barbara finished her school day, she would care for Amanda while I went to my office, where I would work in the afternoon and evening on jobs that required my personal attention. My business has increased in the last 2 weeks to the point where I've had to have the printer I hired work overtime on several evenings, which he really dislikes. I would be capable of handling those jobs as well. And if my business continues to grow while I work in the evenings, I may not need to hire a second person to do the printing. The money I'd save would easily be enough to pay Barbara as a nanny, John continued. Weekends may require Barbara's time, but I would pay for it in addition to her weekly wage. Hopefully, she will be able to handle her homework and her work as a nanny, and if there are any upcoming exams, I will pay for a sitter for Amanda while Barbara stays in my home. You two would be able to start your long-awaited trip. Naturally, you'll need to think about it and discuss it, so don't respond right now unless you can see it's of no interest to you. I don't want to put any pressure on you, though. In truth, I'll need to make a decision soon. If you two believe it is feasible, discuss it with Barbara to see what she thinks about it. June looked at Fred and said, "Well, that sounds interesting. We've been thinking about how we might be able to take an extended trip, so this has real potential. We'll have to let Barbara make her own decision, but I would be surprised if she said no to the idea. She adores Amanda, and I know she gets along with you. How about all three of us? Talk about it tonight after dinner, and we'll call you tomorrow." They all agreed on this suggestion and did not discuss it further. They didn't mention it to Barbara because John wanted only her and her parents to participate in the conversation. They had a nice supper, and although Amanda fussed a few times during the afternoon, worried about her mother, they were able to divert her attention. John departed at 7 p.m., and he and Amanda had a quiet Saturday night. On Sunday morning, John received the expected phone call from June. She informed him that Barbara had been enthusiastic about the idea, and that she and Fred could see no real reason why it couldn't work out, as John had described, given his time constraints. Fred decided to come over on Sunday afternoon and help Barbara set up her room. When Fred arrived, John showed him the layout of the house at the top of the stairs, which included John's master bedroom and bath on the right and Amy's former studio on the left. Amanda's room was located second on the right. The main bathroom was second from the left, and a guest bedroom was located at the end of the hall next to it. John and Fred started by clearing out the junk that had accumulated in the guest bedroom. They also removed an extra chair, nightstand, and lamp that were unnecessary, given the small size of the guest room. They decided to move Barbara's computer desk, bookshelf, and study desk into Amy's studio because John would be busy with work and Amanda in the coming week. Fred planned to buy a rug for Barbara's study room, as well as new blinds and curtains for both of her rooms. When everything was finished, she'd have half the upper floor to herself. The two men then went into the basement to see what changes they could make. The basement contained one large room with a sofa, television, treadmill, and a Bowflex exercise machine. There was also a laundry room and a bathroom with a spacious shower. They decided that another rug would be appropriate, as well as child-proof gates for the basement stairs and the upper floor stairwell. It was decided that Fred would buy and install them. Monday, February 18th. On Monday morning, John called Mary and told her to call him on his cell phone if there were any emergencies and to make a list of all the accounts and files he needed to work on when he arrived later that day. He also stated that any printing jobs that he could complete in the evening could be left for him, as long as Frank had other work to do that day. Mary had called twice. Neither call interfered with his responsibilities with Amanda. Both issues were easily resolved. Fred, June, and Barbara arrived at 3 p.m., bringing enough clothes, accessories, and necessities for Barbara's 2-week stay. They'd set up her room, help her settle in, and keep an eye on Amanda. John thanked them, kissed Amanda goodbye, picked up his briefcase, and left for work. When he arrived at the company, he requested that Frank and Mary meet him in his office as soon as they had a few minutes to spare. When they arrived, he explained his new living situation and how it would impact his work with them. The new routine had him arriving around 3 p.m. and spending the next 2 hours making phone calls or attending meetings that needed to be completed during business hours. After the business closed at 5 p.m., he would work on the accounts and files Mary had designated for him. He would also do any printing work that needed to be done. Hopefully, this will eliminate Frank's need to work overtime. He asked if either of them saw anything wrong with the plan. There were no objections, so he asked them to proceed, but to notify him if they encountered any problems. John worked on the files as needed, making the necessary calls and appointments. Before he knew it, it was 5 p.m. Mary came to the office to inform him that she was leaving for the day. John continued on with his work, pausing for a soft drink and to eat the sandwich he had prepared and brought with him. Even though he only had 2 small printing jobs to complete, he was finished. By 9 p.m., he decided to go to bed early and check in to see how Barbara was doing. When he got home, the house was quiet. He took his briefcase to his den office, then went upstairs. The light was on in Barbara's study and the door was open. He looked in and saw her working hard at her desk. A stack of school books from her binder was scattered on it, and she was sitting there engrossed in her work. She had changed into her pajamas and was sitting with one leg tucked underneath her. "Hello, Barbara," John said. "How's everything going?" "Oh, hello, John," she said. "Everything is great. We've moved all of my belongings in for the time being, and my father has finished installing the blinds and curtains as well as putting down the rugs. He said he'd install the child gates in the next day or two. How was Amanda for you? Did she cause you any trouble?" Barbara paused and admitted, "Well, she was fussy a couple of times. I believe it was the same problem as missing her mother. Aside from that, everything was fine." John looked at her stack of books and asked, "How is your homework going? Are you experiencing any problems? Just the usual math problems. Perhaps you could help me with a few of these questions later." "Okay, no problem. Just let me get cleaned up and get rid of this jacket and tie," John explained later. John assisted Barbara with her algebra. He noticed she was more at ease with him than 2 weeks ago. She smiled without being concerned that her braces would show. She was still easily embarrassed, and her cheeks turned crimson when his hand accidentally covered hers while reaching for a pencil. The rest of the week went very well, and Barbara and John were able to establish some routines in the house. Every morning, John would get up first and prepare breakfast. Barbara would prepare bag lunches for the 2 of them later in the day, and Amanda would eat while John worked in his home office. When Barbara left for school for the day, John took over Amanda's care. On 2 occasions, John had insufficient work to do in the evening, allowing him to return home at 6 p.m. to join Barbara for dinner. She was proving to be a skilled cook, capable of preparing a wide range of dishes. One night, John stayed at home until he put Amanda to bed so Barbara could study for a test the following day. Both evenings, John returned to the office and worked until almost midnight. Their first weekend with the new arrangement went well. Barbara looked after Amanda while John went into the office on Saturday afternoon, and John spent the evening with Amanda while Barbara went out with some friends. On Sunday, John invited Fred and June to supper, and the 4 of them talked about how their week had gone. They decided things had gone well enough to make it permanent. Barbara's remaining clothes would be delivered this week, and John would arrange for temporary guardianship papers to be prepared so that he could legally represent Barbara's parents if the school required it or an emergency arose. 2 bank accounts would be established, one for John to deposit Barbara's wages, and the other for a balance provided by her parents for clothing, incidentals, and her regular allowance. Fred and June were excited about the prospect of traveling around the country in their motorhome, and they intend to begin preparing it within the next week. They decided to buy a dolly so they could tow their car behind the motorhome, and they intend to leave in 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks flew by as John and Barbara worked to perfect their routines. Everything went smoothly, with only one emergency arising on that occasion. A key client needed to meet with John unexpectedly. So John was forced to ask his neighbor, Vicki Pierce, a 60-year-old widow who had recently moved next door, to babysit Amanda for him. Vicky, who insisted he call her, thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to observe Amanda and insisted that John call her whenever it was necessary. He was pleased with her offer because it addressed one of his concerns. John's business grew steadily, and if he hadn't chosen to work evenings, he would have needed to hire another employee soon. Mary was steadily improving at her job, to the point where John was rarely called at home. He discovered that the enormous pressure he had been under to succeed in both his business and as a single parent had been significantly reduced. He felt he could start to enjoy life again. Since Amy's departure, the emotional strains and pressures he had been experiencing had almost completely subsided, any erotic thoughts that he had. Thinking about Amy now was like setting the temperature control to ice water. As the 1-month anniversary of Amy's departure approached, John discovered that if he limited his erotic thoughts to images of his first girlfriend, with whom he had a satisfying relationship during his first year of university, while John still spent much of his day thinking about Amy and always fell asleep with her image in his mind, he had begun to accept the painful emptiness in his heart and move on to life without her. He'd also started to wean himself off the nightly glass of scotch he needed to fall asleep. He was concerned that it would become a habit, and he couldn't afford the consequences if alcohol took over his life. He had too much to live for with Amanda. Sunday, March 10th. June and Fred joined John, Barbara, and Amanda for supper and an enjoyable evening together. The next day, the two of them intended to leave in their motorhome, following an enjoyable meal. They all went into the living room where they talked and watched Amanda play on the floor. At one point during the conversation, John stated, "I'm really looking forward to this trip, but I'm really upset because Amy hasn't called us since she left. We don't even know what number to call her. It is as if she has vanished from the face of the earth. I don't really want to talk to her, but I'm surprised she hasn't called you," Fred replied. "I certainly don't expect her to call me," John said. "I'm confident that since I forced her to cut herself off from Amanda and me, I'm at the top of her list of least popular people." Their conversation continued until John realized he had a question for both June and Fred. "By the way, Barbara has a driver's license, right?" Fred replied, "I seem to have seen her in your car." "Yes, she does. In fact, she drives quite well. But we're taking the car with us so we can go shopping and sightseeing while we're away," John said. "That's good to know. I have Amy's car here, which I don't need. What I'll do is make sure Barbara can drive it, and she can use it for school and whatever else comes up, so long as you're okay with it. That will be fine with us," Fred explained. "In fact, it would be beneficial to us if Barbara could check the house on her way home from school. She could pick up the mail and ensure that everything was secure." Barbara, who had been playing with Amanda, looked to the adults after this final exchange. She had clearly been listening to their conversation. "You mean I could use your car?" she asked. "That would be awesome. I could easily check the house every day if you wanted, and I could even go grocery shopping if you promised to drive safely." "Barbara, I have no problem with you using the car," John responded. "Oh, thank you very much. I'll be very careful. My driving instructor told me I was an excellent driver." Barbara rose from her seat beside Amanda and dashed over to John's side, hugging him tightly. She smiled from ear to ear and her eyes sparkled. When she realized what she had done, she hugged him again and kissed his cheek. She blushed before returning to play with Amanda. As it got later, Barbara announced that she would put Amanda to bed and then study. June and Fred decided it was best to go to bed early if they were leaving in the morning, so they said their goodbyes to their daughter. They gave her the usual parental admonitions to do well in school and listen to John, after promising to call at least 2 or 3 times per week. They left. They appeared ecstatic to finally be able to begin their true retirement. John and Barbara waved goodbye from the front door. Wednesday, March 27th. John's last 2.5 weeks had passed quickly. He and Barbara continued to work out the specifics of their individual and collective responsibilities around the house. Barbara did the majority of her grocery shopping now that she could drive other than to check on her parents' home. She would typically do this on Saturdays while John cared for Amanda. Barbara had slept in that morning because she knew her morning classes had been canceled due to a teacher's meeting. She had asked John to wake Amanda up, which she now did routinely. He just finished feeding Amanda when she started crying and looking around. John had hoped that the instances of missing her mother would eventually stop. Amanda continued to complain. However, Barbara came downstairs to eat her breakfast while still in her pajamas. Amanda stopped crying as soon as she saw Barbara. John noticed right away and said, "Barbara, she was upset because you were not here. I guess we're both on our way to being able to live without Amy." "You had better not decide to return home right away," John said, half jokingly. "No way," Barbara said. "I enjoy caring for Amanda and living with you." She smiled at John, picked up Amanda, and headed upstairs. Thursday, April 4th. It was shortly after 10 a.m. John had just finished reading a picture book to Amanda. She was sitting in her high chair in the kitchen, scribbling on a piece of paper with a crayon. John was enjoying a cup of coffee when the front doorbell rang. Before heading to the door, John double-checked Amanda's seatbelt fit. He could see the side of a woman's head through the tiny window in the front door. He opened the door and saw Lynn Cameron, Amy's longtime friend, standing there. "Well, hello, Lynn. I haven't seen you for a long time. Hello, John. I thought I'd stop by and see if you had any coffee in your office. I was told that you work from home during the day." "Sure. Come in. I have a fresh pot waiting for you." He laughed. Lynn walked into the kitchen with John and sat at the table. Lynn matched Amy's age and height, with long black hair and dark eyes. She worked as a real estate agent. She was dressed as usual, in a white sweater that clung to every curve. She had removed her jacket before sitting and was now leaning back in her chair, as if to highlight her obvious features. John poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from Lynn. "So, Lynn, what brought you here today?" "I'm sure it isn't just the coffee. Actually, that wasn't the only thing. Amy and I have been talking on the phone a lot lately, and she has invited me to come over. She is aware that she is not permitted to contact you, but she hoped I could stand in for her. Well, I'm not really interested in discussing Amy with you. We've been trying to get over her, and now that we've had some success, I don't want to remove the scabs from those wounds." "I understand," John Lynn replied. "Amy has told me that while the terms you insisted on upset her at the time, she has since thought about it and realizes that it is for the best. She has not asked me to reopen that issue with you. What she wants is for me to take some photos of Amanda for her. I hope that is all right with you." "Photos are not an issue, Lynn. I understand she would want to see pictures of herself. Isn't she afraid they'll bother her?" "Not that I should be worried about her. I'm just curious. I asked her the same question, John. She understands that seeing Amanda and how she is changing will most likely upset her. But she insists on seeing her. I brought my digital camera, and we'll take some photos while I drink my coffee." She took out her camera and took a few photos of Amanda as she drew lines on paper. After putting down the camera, Lynn said, "I've had a lot of long conversations with Amy, both before she left you and since I had to tell you that I thought she was wrong in her decision. I told her she had the kind of family that most women dream about. I know if my ex had been like you, I would not have divorced him." "Thanks for your vote of confidence," John said. "She's made her decisions, and all I can do is try to live with them. It has been extremely difficult for me. And if Amanda and my business hadn't kept me busy, I'm not sure what I would have done." "That is something that has been bothering me," Lynn explained. "How are you managing to run your business while also raising Amanda?" "Well," John responded, "the first few days were difficult, so I had Amy's mother babysit for me. Amanda now has a nanny who looks after her while I am at work." "Oh, that seems like a good idea." "I hadn't considered that," Lynn said. "Who do you have as a nanny? Her name is Barbara, and she is—" John was interrupted by Lynn's cell phone ringing, and he waited for her to answer. Hearing her side of the conversation, John realized Lynn had forgotten she had a hair appointment scheduled. It was now 10:30 a.m., and her hairdresser had called to inquire as to her location. The appointment was for 10:15. "I apologize," John Lynn said. "I'll have to go. I'll take a few more photos before heading out for my appointment. How about you hold her for a few of them? I already have some of her coloring." John complied, and Lynn was on her way out the door in less than a minute. As she left, she said, "I'll tell Amy about you getting the nanny because I'm sure she was curious about how you were doing. If you don't mind, I'll drop by from time to take more photos. Wednesday, May 1st. Barbara's parents had returned from their first extended trip the previous weekend. John and Barbara had invited them over for supper, and they arrived early enough to share photos and stories from their trip. During their trip, they met another couple who shared their interests and hoped to travel with them again. Their new friends had already committed to a tour of the Northeast states and the East Coast of Canada, and they planned to leave on May 15th, just as Fred and June were hoping to meet them. They were eager to learn how things had gone for John and Barbara while they were away. They were glad to hear that everything was going well. John explained that while his business was growing, he still had at least 2 evenings per week to come home and eat supper with Barbara and Amanda, or to assist Barbara with her schoolwork. She had been doing well in school according to the tests she had taken. Her parents proved Amanda was adapting very well to having Barbara in her life and had started taking a few tentative steps. She had begun to speak, referring to her father as Data and Barbara as Baba. Her grandparents were ecstatic about the news. Barbara stated that she had an important announcement for her parents as they sat in the living room. Guess what? My orthodontist told me at my appointment last week that I could have these braces removed in June. Isn't that wonderful news? They all congratulated her because she hadn't shared this news with John yet. She had been planning to surprise them all. She also informed them that she had decided what type of career she wanted to pursue. She'd decided to become a graphic designer. When her mother asked what prompted her decision, she said she'd heard. John mentioned the need for such people. He had been speaking with a client, but after hearing the term, Barbara looked into what kind of career this would be. Barbara had researched it and decided it sounded like something she would be interested in doing. They congratulated her on making a career decision, but advised her to keep her options open until she graduated high school. She still had a year to go, so other career options needed to be considered. She agreed to keep her mind open about the subject. At that point, John had spoken up and stated, "You know, my company may someday require a graphic designer. I am currently contracting out some of that work." Barbara then said, "Maybe I could work for you someday," and smiled. Later, John informed Barbara's parents that Amy had sent a friend over to take pictures of Amanda, which they all agreed was probably a good idea. He also informed them that Amy had told her friend that John's decision to keep her away from Amanda was probably a good one. Fred and June had yet to hear from Amy and were beginning to believe they would never hear from her again. The beginning of the week had been routine, but on Wednesday, John received a phone call that sent him into a tailspin. Bob Taylor called to let him know that his divorce papers had been returned by the court and that everything would be finalized in 3 weeks. This news upset John more than I expected. That afternoon, while Amanda slept instead of doing office work, John lay down on his bed and stared up at the ceiling, his thoughts about Amy. The pain in his chest returned later in the afternoon as he prepared to leave for the office. Lynn called to see if it would be okay to drop by the next afternoon to take some photos. John asked her to wait until the next week because he wasn't ready to deal with anything or associate with Amy right away. They agreed on the following Tuesday afternoon, Monday, May 27th. This day marked the culmination of John's bad month. The month had begun with notification that his divorce would soon be finalized, and on Thursday of the previous week, he had received the documents proving his once-ideal marriage to Amy had ended. He had gone to work that Thursday afternoon but only stayed for a few hours, deciding to complete only the absolutely necessary tasks. He told Mary what was going on, and she was concerned enough about his mood to call him from her home. Twice. After she left at 5 p.m., he returned home early, poured himself a stiff scotch, and shut himself in his office. He had not wanted Barbara to see how upset he was. That didn't work because Barbara had knocked on his door and walked in. His tears were at their worst. He told her that the reason for his blue mood was that his marriage had officially ended. She hugged him and told him that he still had her and Amanda. Her encouragement helped him get through this rough patch. But it was the news she delivered on Monday that really upset him. On her way back from school, Barbara made her usual stop at her parents' house to pick up the mail and inspect the property. When she walked into John's house, she found a message on the answering machine. She wasn't in her usual bubbly and upbeat mood. John was sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee, while Amanda was in her high chair, scribbling with crayons on a few pieces of paper. Barbara stated, "I have some news to tell you. I'm not sure you'll like it, but I have to tell you. When I arrived at my parents' house today, there was a message on the machine for them from Amy." "So, what did she say?" John responded. "I imagine she told them the divorce had been finalized. She did not mention it, but based on her message, they would have known she left it on Friday evening after I had checked the house. She said she was calling to let them know she was getting married to Peter Bridges on Saturday at 2 p.m. at the courthouse. She informed him that they were invited to come. The effect on John was immediate, as his face turned pale and his eyes teared up. "Oh, God," he said. "There's more," Barbara explained. She informed them that she and Peter would leave on Sunday at 6 p.m. for Paris. "She's already left the country. I'm very sorry. I have to tell you this, John." John shed a few tears, which he wiped away with his handkerchief. "That's fine," he said. "We knew she wanted that all along. It's just so hard to accept that she's gone." John rose and hugged Barbara. "I'm so glad I have you here for Amanda tonight. The way I'm feeling, I'd be terrible company for her. I'm going down to the office. I can shut the door and get this out of my system." Barbara watched John walk out the door. After he left, she stated, "I wish I could help him get over her. He is a really nice guy. I would never have treated him like that." A minute later, she walked to the phone to inform her parents of the news via their cell phones. Tuesday, June 11th. John was waiting for Barbara when she arrived home. He knew she would be a little late because she had her final orthodontist appointment this afternoon. He hoped that finally removing the braces would allow Barbara to become more social. She was far too reserved and easily embarrassed for a girl her age. When she came in, he said, "Well, Barbara, give me that big smile. You have been hiding for so long." She did exactly that. And John said, "Now I want to see that smile all the time. You are a beautiful girl, and you no longer have any excuses for hiding it." Barbara blushed slightly and said, "Thank you for saying that. That is the nicest thing anyone has told me in a long time." Barbara walked over and hugged him before kissing him on the cheek. She took a step back, gave him another big smile, and then leaned forward to kiss his cheek again. This time, it was John's turn to blush slightly. Monday, July 1st. John's work had recently kept him busier at the office, and he wasn't able to join Barbara and Amanda for supper as often. He decided to spend the holiday weekend as a family. He spent Saturday doing minor housework, but he told Barbara that he would be responsible for preparing the meals that day and that she should make plans to go out with her friends that night. He spent his Saturday evening playing with Amanda, reading to her, and eventually bathing and putting her to bed. He sat beside her, singing her lullabies until she fell asleep. When Barbara arrived home at 11:30, the two of them sat up to watch Saturday Night Live. They both enjoyed the performance on Sunday afternoon. They visited the local zoo. Barbara brought along a friend, a girl from her old neighborhood. John pushed Amanda in a stroller, allowing her to see the animals and get plenty of fresh air and sunshine as they walked. The two teenagers spent their time as any other teenage girl would. They flirted with a teenage boy who sold ice cream to the visitors, whispered conspiratorially, and laughed a lot about things John didn't notice. Overall, they had a good time. He had never seen anyone be so outgoing. Barbara. For dinner, they all went to a nice family restaurant. They'd brought some of Amanda's food and her special spoon, and the two girls took turns keeping her from making too much of a mess. They all had a good time while eating their meal. There was a lot of laughter at the table, and Amanda joined in, even though she didn't understand everything that was said. On Monday, they went to the city park, arriving early enough to secure a good spot under a tree, a location where they could have a nice picnic with the food they had prepared that morning. Barbara brought another friend, this time a different girl, while John and Amanda sat on a blanket under the tree, Amanda playing with some of the toys they had brought for her amusement. The two girls left to see if any of their other friends were also at the park. Again, there was much whispering and giggling. Later in the afternoon, they ate the food they had brought and then purchased ice cream from a vendor. After their meal, the two girls took Amanda to the playground and entertained her while John watched. The fresh air and exercise exhausted Amanda, and she fell asleep on the blanket while the adults watched the fireworks that capped the evening. Barbara joined John in the living room that night, after Amanda had been put to bed and sat beside him on the sofa. She'd showered and changed into her nightgown. Her hair was loose and freshly brushed, rather than in the ponytail she usually wears. John noticed that she looked less like a child and more like the adult she was about to become. "Thank you so much for a wonderful weekend, John," she said. "This was the most fun I've had in a long time, and I'm grateful that you let me bring a friend along." "You are very welcome, Barbara," John responded. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. It's been a long time since I had such a good time. So let's do it again, Barbara suggested. She got up, hugged John, and announced, I'm going to bed now. Thank you again. As she exited the room, she turned to give John a big smile and a wave. After she had vanished, John watched the doorway for several long moments before getting up and heading upstairs. June and Fred returned to town a week after their extended trip. Throughout the summer, they spent most weekends and evenings visiting John, Barbara, and Amanda. They had many stories and photos from their trip to share. Throughout the summer, the five of them had a great time together. Once Barbara had finished school, John tried to work as much as possible during the day. He only worked in the evenings when there was printing to be done or he had fallen behind. This gave Barbara more time with her friends while also allowing him to spend more evenings with his daughter. Lynn Cameron came by about once a month to photograph Amanda. She had taken photos of Amanda feeding herself while walking, as well as her attempts to crawl up the stairwell to the second floor. There was usually one of her on her father's knee, or John holding her. Now that Amy was in Paris, Lynn was emailing her photos from her July photo shoot. Lynn had clearly expressed her interest in John. After taking the photo, she approached John, getting close enough to touch the buttons on his shirt, which she did. She looked up into his eyes and said, You know, you are divorced now. You can ask me out if you want. You have your nanny with you now, so you could stay out all night if you wanted. John took her hand in his and said, I might take you up on that, but not right now. I'm just not prepared for that step yet. It might take a few more months. Do you remember that? I'm first on the list for when you start dating again. She smiled gently at him, took her hand from his, and walked over to the table where she picked up her cup of coffee. She left within a few minutes. John watched her walk to her car and get inside. She waved at him as she drove away. In early August, John overheard Fred asking June what they should give Barbara for her birthday. When John asked when her birthday was, they informed him that it was on the 17th. He realized he'd have to buy a gift for her himself. He'd have to give it some thought. Saturday, August 17th. John awoke slightly earlier than usual on Barbara's birthday. Do you want to prepare a special breakfast for her and need a few extra minutes? He was already prepared when she arrived downstairs. Good morning, birthday girl, he said as Barbara entered the kitchen, her eyes widening with surprise. A banner hung on the wall above the table, proclaiming in large, multicolored letters, Happy birthday, Barbara. The table had a festive tablecloth and was set with John's finest china and silverware. There were candles lit on the table. You sit down and I will serve you. I am making blueberry pancakes because your mother told me they were your favorite. I'll give you a glass of orange juice first, and you can drink it while I go get Amanda. Barbara finally said her first words of the morning. Wow, you didn't have to do all this for my birthday. Thanks so much. This is great. She sat down in the chair. John indicated and poured her some orange juice. I will be right back, he said. Then they went upstairs. Barbara smiled broadly as she watched John walk up the stairs. She thought to herself, I really hope he'll keep me as Amanda's nanny until she's ready for school. Maybe by then he will feel the same way I do about him. John brought Amanda down, served the pancakes to him and Barbara, and made one for Amanda as well. After they had eaten, John handed Barbara an envelope and said, Here's a gift from Amanda and me. I hope you like it. I wasn't quite sure what to get you. Barbara opened the envelope and took out a birthday card, which she read twice before commenting, How sweet. That's a lovely card. Thank you. Barbara opened the card, which contained another, slightly smaller envelope. She pulled out a gift certificate and a brochure. They were both printed with the name Domenico, which is a well-known local beauty shop. Barbara, John said you're getting older, and I thought you might enjoy this. It's a gift certificate for Total Beauty and Spock's Variations. You could go there and spend all day getting everything, or you could do it one item at a time. The brochure explains everything. Oh, thanks, John. This is wonderful. One of my friends has been to Domenico and says it was fantastic. I'm really looking forward to using this. Barbara rose from her seat and approached John, who was standing near the sink. She wrapped her arms around him and clutched him tightly, her head against his chest. The hug lasted long enough for John to become uncomfortable. He gave her a small hug before gently taking her arms and pushing her back slightly. Happy birthday. He spoke, then leaned forward to lightly kiss her on the forehead. "I hope you're having a great day. We're going to your parents' house this afternoon for supper." Barbara sat beside Amanda and watched as John cleared the breakfast dishes. She thought to herself, "I'll use this gift to make myself as beautiful as possible for John. Maybe then he'll notice me." That evening, after supper with her parents and after they had given her birthday gifts, she showed her mother the present John had given her. As her mother read the brochure, she commented, "You realize this includes a bikini wax, don't you?" "Mother!" Barbara exclaimed. Her face flushed red, and she turned away from John in embarrassment. Barbara's mother laughed and said, "Now you're getting old enough. If you decide you don't want to use that part of the gift, don't be embarrassed. I'll use it for you. We're going to Texas and Florida this winter, and who knows, I may even get myself a new bikini." The subject was changed, and Barbara eventually recovered from her embarrassment. Tuesday, September 10th. Barbara began her senior year of high school the previous week. They had resumed their normal schedule, with John working the evenings on this particular day. Barbara's first class wasn't until 11 a.m., so she used the time to sit around and read after getting up shortly after 9. She heard the doorbell ring and John greet somebody. In a few minutes, she heard sounds from the kitchen among the murmur of conversation. Out of curiosity, she went to the top of the stairs to see who was there. Amanda walked around the kitchen while a woman she didn't know took photos of her. Barbara noticed the woman was well-dressed and very busty as she watched. The woman approached John and began to run her fingers up and down his chest. They were speaking quietly, and Barbara couldn't understand what they were saying. She watched as John placed his arms on the woman's shoulders and spoke softly to her. The woman laughed as she poked John twice in the chest with her finger. Then she spoke loudly enough for Barbara to hear. "I will definitely hold you to that next month." Then she laughed. Barbara returned to her room with a concerned expression on her face. Who was that woman, and why did John let her touch him like that? She questioned herself. She set her book aside and sat there, deep in thought. Barbara went downstairs at 10:30 a.m. on her way to school. John sat in the living room while Amanda walked around looking for something to play with. "Hello, John," she said. "I was wondering who the woman was who arrived this morning. I saw her from upstairs, but I don't recognize her. That's Lynn Cameron, a friend of your sister. Every month she comes over to photograph Amanda and sends them to her via email. She usually visits in the morning while you are at school." "Oh, okay," Barbara replied. She left for school with a concerned expression on her face. Today is Wednesday, October 16th. It was a warm autumn day, and John had Amanda playing in the front yard. He and Barbara were attempting to potty train her, and he had her dressed in normal clothes with no diaper. The front yard was fenced, and the gate was locked to keep her from getting out onto the sidewalk. John had brought out a ball, which Amanda was attempting to kick. John's attention was completely focused on his daughter, so he didn't notice Lynn Cameron arrive. He knew she was there when he heard the camera shutter click. John looked up and said, "Hello, Lynn. I didn't see you driving up. How are you doing today?" "I'm just fine, John. I'll be even better if you're willing to take me out for dinner this weekend. What are the chances?" John laughed and said, "Well, since you've been so patient with me, I suppose the least I can do is take you out for supper." "What about Saturday night? I'd love that. My Saturday night is open. What are your thoughts? Pick me up at 6 p.m., followed by dinner and possibly dancing. It sounds like you have everything in order." He laughed even harder. "So I'll pick you up at 6 p.m. and we'll go out for supper. I haven't danced in a long time, so please recommend a good place for me to do so." Lynn's turn to laugh came next when she said, "If we can't find a place to dance, I have a lot of good CDs at home." The two of them talked for a few more minutes before Lynn took a few more photos. When she left, she reminded John that he needed to make reservations for them. That night, John was able to join Barbara and Amanda for supper. The three of them ate the meal she had prepared. John asked Barbara if she had any plans for Saturday night, and she said she was available. John asked her to babysit Amanda while he had a date with Lynn Cameron. John noticed Barbara's head jerked up when he mentioned a date, and her smile had faded. She responded to him just a moment later. "Do you have a date with Lynn? I suppose I could babysit if you like." John left to go back to work a few minutes later. He thanked Barbara for the delicious meal, kissed Amanda, and headed out the door. He didn't notice Barbara was deep in thought and did not return his goodbye as he exited the door. Barbara sat beside Amanda after John had left, her eyes welling up with tears. She held Amanda's hand and asked, "What am I going to do, Amanda? I believe your father likes Lynn. What happens if he decides to marry her?" Barbara spent a somber evening with Amanda, shedding a few tears. Later in her room, Amanda decided after she fell asleep that if she was going to compete with Lynn, she needed to change and improve her appearance using your gift certificate. She also decided to begin working out on John's exercise equipment to tone her body while Barbara was at home. I am upset about John's plans. He was at the office, whistling while working. He decided it was time to see if he could truly get over Amy. He'd always thought Lynn was attractive, and she'd made it clear she was interested in him. Even before he and Amy split up, he called and made reservations at one of the better restaurants in town, only to discover that they also had a dance floor. He had new energy and completed his work before 10 p.m. When he got home, he noticed Barbara's light was still on, so he knocked on her door as he went upstairs. When she responded, he asked if he could come in for a minute. She told him to come in, so he opened the door and walked inside. She was sitting on her bed with her back to the headboard and a book on the pillow beside her. Her eyes were just slightly red, and he realized she had been crying. "What is wrong?" "Barbara, is anything bothering you? You seem upset. Was there anything you wanted to do on Saturday night? Because I can always ask Mrs. Pierce next door to babysit." "Oh no, I do not mind babysitting. I suppose I'm just having a bad day." John sat on the edge of her bed, patting her leg. "You already know that I am your guardian while your parents are away. That means you can tell me what bothers you. Your parents just left last week for the winter. So unless it's something you can discuss with your mother over the phone, don't forget I'm here." Barbara said, "There is nothing I really need to talk about right now. I'm just feeling blue, I guess. So, if you ever have anything to talk about, please come to me." John studied her face intently, hoping to detect any seriousness. He decided she didn't seem too upset, so he patted her leg again and stood up from the bed. When he got to the door, she said, "Oh, there is something I wanted to ask you. Is it okay to start using the basement exercise equipment? I definitely want to start getting into shape. Go ahead and use it. Amy and I used to use it all the time, and I should get back into it myself. Just be careful if Amanda is with you, because there are numerous places where she could poke her finger and get it pinched. Don't worry about it. I think I'll start getting up earlier to use the equipment, and I might use it again after Amanda falls asleep," Barbara said. She smiled at John before he turned to leave the room. John felt better than he had in a long time, so he went downstairs and poured himself an ounce of scotch before sitting in the living room to think about his weekend date. Lynn's image had become the one he used to arouse himself during his morning shower after she began attempting to tempt him into taking her out. He was looking forward to seeing if any of his fantasies came true. The next morning, John had just finished setting up the coffee pot when he heard a noise behind him and turned to see Barbara enter via the basement stairway. She was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and the damp stains on the t-shirt indicated that she had a good workout. "Boy, you are serious about getting to the exercise machines," John said. "You are putting me to shame. There's no better time than now to get started." Barbara ran up the stairs and into her bathroom. Within a few moments, John could hear the shower running. Saturday, October 19th. John's day passed slowly, but eventually it was time for him to prepare for his date with Lynn. He had noticed Barbara appearing unusually serious several times throughout the day, and when he asked her if she was certain she didn't mind babysitting, she assured him she didn't. By 5:30, he had showered and dressed and was ready to go. Barbara complimented him on his good looks when he arrived downstairs. He smiled and thanked her for the compliment, then handed her a piece of paper with his locations and phone numbers as he walked to the door. Barbara and Amanda both waved goodbye to him at the door. "He said I might be late, so don't wait up for me," Barbara cried again after he left. She was holding Amanda and told her, "I hope your daddy does not fall in love with her." Amanda responded with her usual data and Baba, which made Barbara smile again. Lynn was ready when John arrived and greeted him at the door. She looked stunning in a figure-hugging black dress. John took her hand, stepped back, looked her over, and whistled. Lynn laughed, then turned to lock the door. Small talk dominated the journey to the Sheraton, where the dining room was located. When they arrived, they were promptly seated in an alcove not far from the dance floor. John ordered scotch for himself and white wine for Lynn. They chatted and sipped their drinks until their meal arrived. Lynn said, "I can't believe you asked me out on a date. I was afraid it would take you a long time to get over Amy." John looked down at his hands and paused for a few moments before responding, "I can't truly say I'm over Amy. I think I've just accepted that she's gone. I need to be realistic. Even now, it would be difficult to turn her down if she appeared at the door and begged me to take her back. Since I know that isn't going to happen, I'd better stop thinking about her. The burning pain has passed, but I still think about her all the time. Now, what else can we discuss that doesn't involve her?" They had a fantastic meal and shared a dessert that included a lot of whipped cream, chocolate syrup, and homemade ice cream before they completed it. They were laughing and feeding each other spoonfuls of whipped cream as they sipped an after-dinner liqueur. The band arrived, set up, and began playing. The band was excellent, and it wasn't long before the two of them took to the dance floor. A nice, slow song was playing as John took Lynn into his arms. He hadn't danced in a year, but the rhythm came back quickly. It didn't hurt that Lynn molded her body to his, and he was acutely aware of the pressure her body was exerting on him. He knew he'd have an arousal soon, and Lynn couldn't help but notice how close they were dancing before the first song ended, confirming his concern. They stayed out for 2 more slow songs, and John eventually accepted that she must have noticed what he was hiding but chose to ignore it. When the 4th song of the set began, John immediately recognized it as the song that he and Amy had discussed. Their song and his excitement quickly faded. Lynn chose this point to ask, "What's the matter? Are you tired of me already?" She laughed amicably, and John felt himself blushing. "Nope, nothing like that. I suppose I have issues. Amy and I both loved that song." They decided to sit after that song, but spent the next several hours dancing to a variety of songs. They decided to leave shortly after midnight. John took Lynn by the arm and led her back to the car, where she turned in his arms and pulled his head down to kiss him hungrily. They stood beside his car for a few minutes, lips locked. They parted, and John opened the door for Lynn. He quickly got into the car and she slid over beside him, and they resumed kissing. A few moments later, John drove back to Lynn's apartment and replied, "Sure." When she asked him if he wanted to come in for a drink, he led her to her apartment door and walked in alongside her. Lynn was right there when he turned back from closing the door, throwing her arms around his neck and beginning another round of deep kisses. They shared several minutes of passionate kissing before coming up for air. John laughed and commented, "I believe you mentioned something about a drink, didn't you?" Lynn replied, "You're right, I did," and left to pour them each a glass of wine. They sat next to each other on the sofa and tapped their glasses together in a toast to good friends, Lynn explained. John repeated her toast, and they sat together drinking wine and talking. Lynn stated, "I told Amy in an email a couple of weeks ago that I was going to try to get you to go with me. She never responded to that one, but she has written me since, so I suppose we're still friends." John hesitated before responding. "It's probably a bad idea to bring up her name with me. Her memory can have a negative impact on my mood. I often wonder how long she will have that effect on me." Lynn reached over and took his glass, placing both glasses on the end table beside her. "Consider this my final word on the subject." She stood up and took John's hand, saying, "Come with me." She led him from the living room down the hall and into her bedroom. The light in the attached bathroom was on, providing enough light for John to see. Lynn let go of his hand as he stood beside the bed and moved over to her dressing table, where she lit several candles. The light reflected from the mirror behind them illuminated the room quite well. She turned and stood in front of John. She reached behind her back, and John heard the zipper on her black dress come down. She quickly removed the dress from her shoulders and dropped it to the floor. She held out her hands on either side of her and asked, "What do you think?" John examined her from head to foot. As he did so, she turned in a complete circle in front of him. When she finished her turn, he said, "Amazing." They soon had sex and took a shower together. They got out of the shower and dried themselves, a very satisfying conclusion to a wonderful evening. Lynn wanted John to stay the night, but he knew he needed to return home. If he hadn't warned Barbara, He might have stayed out all night. It was nearly 2:30 a.m. He kissed Lynn goodbye at her door. Her final words were, "We need to do this again one night." John laughed and said, "It won't be hard to convince me." In less than 5 minutes, John was pulling up in front of his own home. He didn't want to use the garage because he was afraid the sound of the door opening and closing would wake Barbara. He realized his concern for her was pointless when he looked up at her bedroom window and saw her standing there, watching him walk up the sidewalk. When John got upstairs, he went to Barbara's bedroom door and spoke quietly. "Is everything okay, Barbara? I noticed you're still awake." She replied, "Everything is fine." But he noticed something different in her voice, so he asked if he could come in. When she said yes, he opened the door and entered. Barbara turned on the bedside lamp as he entered, and he could see she had been crying. "What's wrong, Barbara? Please tell me what is upsetting you." "You." Barbara did not say anything at first, but eventually asked, "Are you in love with Lynn? Is she going to move in here? I do not want to leave you and Amanda." John was taken aback by Barbara's questions, and he had no idea why. He said, "Barbara, I am not in love with Lynn. We are good friends. She has her own apartment, and I have no plans to move in with her. And I have no intention of having you leave. I'm hoping you'll stay until Amanda goes to school. She's bonded with you like a mother, and I don't want her to go through another separation like she did when Amy left." Barbara was watching him closely as he spoke. When he was finished, she looked relieved. She responded, "Oh, thank you for telling me that. I was afraid you would send me back home soon." A smile spread across her face. John reached forward and rested his hand on the side of her head. "I'm probably more concerned that you'll decide this job isn't for you. Then you have to worry about me ever sending you home." John removed his hand, walked to the door, and stated, "We need to get some sleep. Amanda will be up at her usual time, I am confident. Good night, Barbara. John, before I forget, it's not your birthday next month. Please let me know the day." Barbara stated that it is on November 15th. She thanked him for the information, and he closed the door and left. Barbara turned off the lamp and lay there, thinking for a while before falling asleep. She smiled. Wednesday, October 23rd. Barbara arrived home from school, and John was waiting for her. He had his briefcase by the door and was prepared to leave for work. As she walked in the door, Barbara smiled broadly. "Before you go, John, do you have any plans for November 16th? Barbara asked. John flipped open his organizer to look at it and replied, "No, nothing at all. Why are you asking? I'm taking you out to supper. Barbara said she had reservations for your birthday at 6 p.m. She smiled and continued, "I've arranged for Mrs. Pierce to watch Amanda, so everything is set. Saturday, November 16th. John awoke early, but not as early as Barbara. He was taking his first sip of coffee when Barbara emerged from the basement, where she had clearly been working out. She was dressed in the same t-shirt and shorts she usually wore for exercise. When she saw John, she said, "I'll be out for most of the day, so be ready to go out at 6 p.m. John assured her that he would not forget, and when she went upstairs, he returned to drinking his coffee and watching the morning news headlines on TV. As he relaxed, he began to reflect on how his life was going lately. The business was doing well, so he hired another printer and bought more equipment to keep up with the orders. Mary was doing exceptionally well as office manager, so he had to spend less time on paperwork. Mary suggested they hire a graphic design student from the university to work part-time and eliminate the contract work they had been doing. This had gone extremely well, and the student was now working 3 days a week for 2 hours in the afternoon. Her work far exceeded that of the contractor. John's customers appreciated the improved quality. He was out with Lynn again the previous weekend, and they had exhausted each other in bed. He had been late getting in again, and for the next few days, he noticed Barbara seemed distant. She was back to her old self by Tuesday. Amanda was developing rapidly and using a large number of words on a daily basis. She had been toilet trained for several weeks and was very proud of herself. When her grandparents learned about her progress, they were amazed. Barbara left before 9 a.m., and John spent the day with Amanda, reading her a few favorite books to help her fall asleep for her nap. While she slept, he logged onto the computer and completed some office work. He took Amanda for a walk at 330, and when he returned, he noticed Barbara's car had returned shortly after 430. Vicki Pierce arrived to babysit Amanda after showing Mrs. Pierce where the items she needed for Amanda were located. John went upstairs to shower, shave, and prepare to go out for dinner with Barbara. Barbara came down the stairs at 530 and he was downstairs again. Mrs. Pierce informed John that she was behind him. "Oh, Barbara, just look at yourself." John turned around and realized why Mrs. Pierce had mentioned Barbara's ponytail was gone. Her hair had been cut, layered, highlighted, and styled in a way that focused attention on her face. Her makeup was flawless, and he could tell she'd had a manicure. She wore a black dress with a flared knee-length skirt and spaghetti straps. She carried a small purse that matched her shoes. "Barbara, you look great," John said. "I can barely recognize you. Since I last saw you this morning, you've gone from 17 to 21. Many thanks, John. I've used your gift certificate. That is where I have been all day. I decided it was time to change my appearance, and everything that came with the gift certificate allows me to do it. Vicki was kind enough to alter one of Mom's dresses so that I could wear it." Vicki approached her and turned her around in a circle so John could see the full extent of Barbara's transformation. She said, "Barbara, John is correct. You transformed from a girl to a woman." Barbara was blushing but still smiling from ear to ear. She approached John, took his arm, and asked, "Well, Vicki, do we look like a couple?" "You sure do." Vicki said we needed a camera to photograph you two. "Have you got one, John?" John went to his office and grabbed his digital camera, while he and Barbara posed. Vicki took several photos of the two of them, both individually and together. By the time she finished, it was time to leave. John led Barbara out to the car and assisted her into the passenger seat. As he began to drive away, he asked, "Barbara, you haven't told me where we're going." "I reserved a table in the Sheraton dining room. I figured it must be good because you took Lynn there. I left the phone number with Vicki. You appear to get along with her fairly well," John said. "I did not realize you knew her so well. She comes over occasionally when you are at work and we talk. Barbara said she is very nice." They arrived at the Sheraton and were directed to their table. John was astounded by Barbara's transformation. She not only appeared to be several years older, but she also acted like an adult. She appeared to be neither self-conscious nor lacking in confidence. She appeared to have grown up overnight. His realization of how much Barbara had changed was reinforced within minutes of their sitting down. A waitress came by to take their bar order, and when John requested a glass of white wine, she inquired as to whether your wife would like the same. John hesitated, unsure whether to correct the error about Barbara's age or her marital status first. Before he could say anything, Barbara responded, "I'll just have a Coke. Thank you." Her grin had returned, and John had to laugh at their exchange. They ate a delicious meal and engaged in a longer and more serious conversation than usual. Neither thought they could handle a full dessert, but John suggested they share one, and Barbara quickly agreed. Their meal had been served and eaten at a leisurely pace, and the band had already begun by the time they finished dessert. The band had begun playing a slow song, and John noticed Barbara watching the couples on the dance floor, so he asked if she wanted to dance. "Barbara, I suppose I should first ask if you enjoy slow dancing." "Yes, I do, and I'd love to dance," Barbara replied. "My father taught me when I started high school," he explained. "Everyone should know how to dance to slow music." They danced for the next 3 songs before the band switched to a set of faster ones. Barbara was a smooth, confident dancer, and John enjoyed sharing the dance floor with her. She grabbed his arm as they returned to their seats, and John noticed a flush on her cheeks. They went back to the dance floor 5 more times. Whenever the band played slow music, both of them had a great time on the dance floor, and by the end of the band's final set, they were completely satisfied with their evening out. Barbara took John's arm as he led her out to the car. When they pulled into the garage and the door was closed behind them, Barbara said, "There's one more thing I'd like to give you for your birthday." She leaned over and gently kissed him on the lips. It wasn't a long kiss, but John was acutely aware of it and couldn't think of anything to say as Barbara pulled back and opened the door to exit the car. John quickly recovered and rushed out and around the car to help her out. Once inside, they had an animated conversation with Vicki about their night out. John made coffee, and they each drank a cup while talking. After Vicki left, John took Barbara's hand and thanked her for a wonderful evening. He told her that it was the best birthday he had in a long time. They walked upstairs together and John stopped at his bedroom door. Barbara moved on to her own, turning to give him a small wave. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Barbara." John spoke as Barbara entered her room. John went into his own room and closed the door, but he remained awake for another hour as he relived the evening from memory several times. Tuesday, December 31st. It was 7 p.m., and John was waiting for Barbara to prepare for their evening out with her parents. Fred and June had returned home on the 15th, and the five of them had spent a lot of time together during the Christmas break. The four adults planned to attend a New Year's Eve party in the ballroom of the Sheraton Hotel. Mrs. Pierce was going to babysit Amanda. Barbara had announced that she would be the designated driver for the evening, so John poured himself an ounce of scotch while waiting. He sat and sipped his drink, recalling the events of the previous 2 weeks. Barbara had changed dramatically since Fred and June left on their trip. Her new hairstyle, combined with her newfound confidence, had transformed her into a new person. John had been very busy in the weeks leading up to Christmas as his business continued to grow. He was anticipating a brief lull after the new year, as is customary in most businesses. He had reduced his business hours between Christmas and New Year's to give his employees some extra time off. He felt they deserved it. Christmas was spent with Barbara's parents, and it was a fun time for everyone. June had hung mistletoe in the doorway from the living room to the kitchen, and she and Barbara had taken turns catching John and Fred as they walked underneath it. John noticed that Barbara was keeping a close eye on him and had caught him under the mistletoe at least half a dozen times. Fred and June decided to attend a New Year's Eve party and were fortunate to find 4 tickets still available. They insisted that John and Barbara join them. John and Barbara left to pick up her parents shortly after 8 o'clock when Vicky Pierce arrived to babysit. They met another couple at the party, Pat and Sylvia, who were John's friends. The 3 couples sat together at a single table and spent the evening dancing, talking, and generally having fun. Barbara especially enjoyed being among the adults. She performed almost every dance, if not with John, then with either her father or Pat. By the end of the evening, they were all exhausted and eager for the midnight celebration. When midnight approached, Barbara made sure to get John up on the dance floor as they danced and people began counting down the final few seconds of the year. She moved closer to John and whispered in his ear, "This has been the best year of my life." "Well, this year began horribly for me, but it is ending much more positively. I've really enjoyed having you in my home. You have been an excellent caregiver for Amanda. I believe she loves you like a mother." "That is such a nice thing to say, John. I'm not sure I could love her more if she were my own," Barbara replied. Barbara leaned forward and rested her head on his shoulder as they continued to dance. As the countdown reached midnight and shouts of Happy New Year rang out, the two of them parted ways, with John leaning forward to give Barbara a brief kiss. "Happy New Year, Barbara," he said. "Happy New Year," she responded. Fred and June came over to join them and wish them a Happy New Year. Within a minute, the band began to play, and Fred led his daughter away to dance with her. As they danced, he spoke. "Your mother and I have noticed that you seem to really like John. We wouldn't want you to forget. He's been through a lot with your sister, and toying with his emotions would be unfair to him. You're still too young to understand your own heart, and you have the potential to cause him significant harm. We trust him with you, but we want to be certain we can trust you with him. Oh, Daddy, I would never hurt John. I really like him, but I'll wait until I'm 18 to tell him. I promise." They left shortly after, with Barbara driving later from her room. She thought about her conversation with her father and how difficult it would be not to tell John how she felt. She knew her father was right, but it took her a long time to fall asleep. Saturday, March 15th. It was almost spring, and the weather had been warm and sunny. Barbara had left to get groceries, and Vicky Pierce had come over to see John and Amanda. She asked if it was okay for her to take Amanda for a walk. John put a jacket on Amanda and watched them walk down the sidewalk. He knew Vicky would end up carrying Amanda as she grew tired, after a block or so. John poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and was almost finished when he decided to look out the front door to see if Vicky was returning with Amanda. When he stepped out the door, he noticed Lynn Cameron had met them in front of the house and was taking photographs. Lynn called out to John at the top of the stairs. "I do not have time to come in. I need to show a house in a few minutes. It's just around the corner, and when I saw Amanda outside, I thought I'd take some photos for Amy. I'll call you later this week." Her final photo was of Amanda and Vicky standing hand in hand on the sidewalk in front of John, who was standing in the doorway as Lynn drove away. They all waved goodbye. Saturday, May 17th. John was preparing for a date with Lynn. They were planning to go to a bar. They had found it a few months before. It had a house band playing good dance music, and they both liked the atmosphere. Barbara was also going out on a date, and Vicky Pierce was going to babysit. John had noticed that Barbara had been going on more dates since the new year. He didn't notice a specific guy who had piqued her interest. John noticed that every weekend she went out, she was with a different person. He was pleased. She didn't have a long-term boyfriend because he felt jealous when she was picked up for her first date of the year. He had started to think of Barbara as a young woman. Since their dinner at the Sheraton and the New Year's party they went to with her parents. For a while, he suspected she had a crush on him based on how she reacted around him. He knew she was far too young for him, but the attention she had shown him had helped him rebuild his damaged self-esteem following Amy's departure. Barbara had grown distant from him in recent months, and he had begun to suspect that she was dissatisfied with her job as Amanda's nanny. He certainly hoped that was not the case. As John was leaving, he encountered Barbara's date at the door. He was an average-looking teenage boy, neat and free of popular piercings. As John passed him on the stairs, he advised him not to keep Barbara out too late. The boy appeared flustered as he replied, "No, sir, I won't." John picked up Lynn and they had a fun evening dancing and talking. They were very comfortable together and enjoyed each other's company. They left for Lynn's apartment shortly before midnight. Lynn invited John to her apartment for coffee and they went to the kitchen where she prepared a fresh pot. While she waited for her coffee to brew, John moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her. He pushed her long hair aside and kissed her neck beneath her ear. She laughed and replied, "I thought you wanted coffee." "I do, but I don't mind you either." He said, "Why don't we go into the living room? We can come back here for coffee later," Lynn responded. They sat on the sofa, and John wrapped his arm around her, bringing her closer as he kissed her. They soon made love. They lay down next to each other after finishing. "Wow, that was excellent," Lynn said a little later. "I'm going to miss our times together." John leaned back slightly and questioned her. "Do you miss them?" Lynn lay there for a moment before bending forward to give John a small kiss. She leaned back to look John squarely in the eyes as she spoke. "Before you left tonight, I was going to have to tell you that I might not see you again. In a way, I hope not. I've met someone and hope he's the one for me. He might be the one," Lynn continued. "His name is Mark Arnold, and he joined the agency last month. We've been out to lunch a few times, but there's something about him that feels right. I'd like to pursue a relationship with him if he's interested, but I'm not the type of woman who can be in two relationships at once, especially if he and I develop serious feelings for each other." John pondered what Lynn had just said and responded, "I've really enjoyed our time together, Lynn, but I think we both know we'll never be more than friends. I appreciate your company, but I don't think either of us has felt the spark. I really hoped you felt that way, John. As it appears, ours was primarily a physical relationship between friends." John caressed her cheek and gave her a quick kiss. He said, "In addition to enjoying every minute I've spent with you, you've really helped me recover from Amy. I still think about her, but the pain is mostly gone." They got up, dressed, and walked to the kitchen together. Lynn poured them both a cup of coffee, and they sat down at the table. After taking a sip from her, Copeland stated, "I've received a lot of long messages from Amy lately. She doesn't say it directly, but I believe she is starting to have serious second thoughts about what she did. There's something wrong over there, but she won't say what it is." John frowned and replied, "Not many months ago. That kind of news would have raised my pulse, and I would have wanted to learn more. But now John remained silent for a while, apparently thinking about something. Finally, he looked up and said, "One thing I've never told you." The day she left, her professor came up the walk to assist her with her luggage. He turned and gave me the most smug, self-satisfied expression you could imagine. Since then, I've wondered what his true motivations were. Lynn gave him a serious look before saying, I'm not trying to suggest anything, but I thought it was interesting that Amy's confidence level appears to have dropped. She's been asking about you and Amanda more, and I've told her that we go out at least once a month. She hasn't asked for specifics, but I did inform her that you stayed overnight the last time you were here. Did you tell her that? Did she say anything about it? I don't understand how she could be jealous after what she did to me. I mean, she divorced me, John explained. She never mentioned it at all. It's as if she pretended I had never told her. She has been my friend since forever, and she understands that if you were still married, I would never have looked at you again. I gave you a lot of second glances, but you get what I mean. She laughed. They drank their coffee, and John left shortly after 1 a.m. He kissed her goodbye at the door and told her to come in for coffee or a visit whenever she was available, and to bring Mark with her. He must be a very nice guy if you prefer him to me. They both laughed. Sunday, May 18th. John was drinking coffee in the morning, waiting for Amanda to wake up. When Barbara returned from working out on the exercise machines downstairs, she asked if we had any orange juice in the fridge this morning. When John responded affirmatively, she went to the refrigerator and poured herself a glass. She sat at the table and joined John. He noticed she had worked up a good sweat and asked, "How is the exercise program going?" "Great," she stated. "I have lost 7 pounds and a lot of inches. I thought you looked much fitter." John responded, "Not that you were unfit before." He laughed. "So, John, how was your date last night?" "You did not stay out as late as you did the last time you were with Lynn," Barbara said. John responded, "We had a great time." We went out dancing for a while before returning to her apartment for coffee. She had some real news for me, though. She met a man she really likes, so she and I will no longer be going out. Barbara thought for a moment before saying, "You really seem to like her. Are you very upset? Did you two break up?" John laughed and responded, "I really like her as a friend and I'll miss going out with women, but she and I were never meant to be romantically involved. We didn't have a partner, so we were great company for each other." Barbara reflected on this for a while before saying, "I'm glad she didn't hurt you like Amy." Barbara emptied her glass and placed it in the sink. She went upstairs, and as she entered her bathroom, she pumped her fist in the air and said yes. Downstairs. John was still at the table, holding his cup of coffee. He was exactly where he had been seated, turned to face the stairs and watch Barbara ascend. Saturday, June 21st. Barbara had been working towards this day for 4 years. Her parents, John and Amanda, were all in attendance at her high school graduation ceremony. Her parents had left their motorhome in a Minnesota state park and driven home in a car. They were driving back later that week to spend the summer there. Before the diplomas were distributed, the principal and department heads presented awards to the top 10 students. Barbara was stunned, and her guests were ecstatic when she was named the 3rd best student graduating this year. She had no idea it was coming. Later, after the diplomas were distributed, Barbara joined her guests to accept their congratulations. Her parents were extremely proud of her and wanted to take pictures of her with her academic achievement plaque. "Make sure you take some pictures of me and the plaque with John." Barbara stated that he is the reason I received it, as I would not have performed as well in math without his help. She walked over to John and wrapped her arms around him. Amanda stood in front of the two of them while the photos were taken. "John, pick up Amanda, and we'll take some more pictures of the 3 of you," June said. John was holding Amanda with his right arm while wrapping his left arm around Barbara's shoulders. Barbara placed her arm around John, and the photographs were taken. June observed, "You 3 look like a real family." As more photographs were taken, the majority, including Barbara, John considered June's final statement. He was beginning to think of Barbara as a member of his family, and he was curious what she would think of such an idea. He knew she had been accepted into her desired graphic design program at the university. It was a 4-year program, so a lot could happen in that time. As he watched Barbara pose and laugh with her parents, he realized she was no longer a schoolgirl. Over the last year, she had transformed her appearance and actions into those of a woman. She would soon be an adult, starting university in the fall, and John was beginning to worry that she would be moving on with her life, and that living in his house and caring for Amanda would no longer be a part of it. He reflected on how he had gotten through the 1-year anniversary of his divorce from Amy without major problems. That night, he shed a few more tears as he sat alone in the living room late into the night, sipping a stiff scotch and reflecting on how his life had changed. He realized that less than a year and a half ago, he was still married to Amy, unaware of the problems in their marriage. Now he was here to celebrate Barbara's high school graduation and wished he could include her in his future plans. He hoped he wouldn't be sipping a late-night scotch and lamenting Barbara's loss. Sunday, August 17th. Barbara was several hundred miles away from John and Amanda on her 18th birthday. On Friday morning, she flew to Minneapolis to meet her parents, and the three of them planned to spend the next week and a half visiting some of Minnesota's popular parks. When Fred called Barbara in June to invite her to join them, she was concerned about who would be able to watch Amanda while John wanted her to spend time with her parents. He made arrangements with Vicki Pierce to babysit Amanda while Barbara was away. Barbara had only been gone 2 days, but John was already missing her. Amanda had really missed Barbara as well. Every day I find myself fussing and crying. She had become extremely dependent on Barbara and was now adamant that Barbara feed her. Amanda was now talking quite well, and John was finally able to reason with her and convince her that Barbara would return later. Amanda was fortunate that she liked Vicki Pierce because she eventually settled down when she came to babysit. A woman's touch appeared to work wonders on Amanda. During Barbara's absence, John was able to complete a significant amount of office work. His company had expanded, and they had now won a statewide contract to supply menus and advertising brochures for a chain of restaurants. Mary and their part-time graphic designer had worked hard to make the project a reality. When the chain requested proposals, the two women submitted the winning bid. This new job kept his staff busy, and there were few slack days left. In fact, John was frequently kept busy in the evenings with print jobs that they couldn't complete during the day. He believed he would soon need to hire another employee. With the increased printing work, he had more paperwork to handle. He had been unsure what to get Barbara for her birthday and had decided on a laptop computer to use at university. He had given it to her before she left, and she was excited to get it. She knew using the computer would make things easier for her at university. He'd given her half a dozen roses. As the week progressed, John missed Barbara more and more. During the summer, he began joining her for morning workouts before Amanda awoke. Now that she was gone, he enjoyed the sessions much less. He persisted with them, though, because he could see they were having the desired effect on his body. Soft muscles and extra pounds were disappearing. On Thursday afternoon, he called Lynn and invited her over for coffee. While she was there, she took some photos for Amy, including a few of Amanda riding her new tricycle. After taking the photos, she and John sat on the patio while Amanda played in the backyard. "So, Lynn, how are you making out with Mark?" "Oh, he's great. We're really getting along. We have a lot of similar interests, and I really hope we can get together permanently one day," she proceeded. "He is, however, insecure and would most likely be concerned if I came to see you here. He knew we were seeing each other. He got engaged a few years ago, and his girlfriend treated you similarly to Amy." "Well," John stated, "I do not want to cause any problems for you. So how about I email you photos of Amanda every month until he's ready to meet me and realizes I'm not his rival?" They agreed that this was a good solution, and that John would send Lynn 6 or 8 photos of Amanda around the middle of each month. They continued their conversation after this was resolved. "So, do you still hear from Amy as frequently as you did? You haven't mentioned her recently," said John. "Actually, I don't hear from her very often. You remember how I said I suspected something was going on? Well, I'm certain now because she has explicitly stated that Peter deceived her. When I asked her what she meant, she told me to forget it." John wondered what she meant by that. It could be something unimportant. "In any case, I believe Amanda's grip on my business has loosened. I have plenty to keep me occupied. Do you mean you haven't found anyone to replace me yet?" Lynn laughed. "Lynn, you are irreplaceable. I haven't even gone anywhere looking for your successor," John explained. They both laughed. Today is Wednesday, October 8th. Barbara's last class of the day ended at 2 p.m., and John was waiting for her when she returned home. He was ready to go into the office, but as had become their custom, he wanted to have coffee with her first and see how her day had gone. As she walked in, she said, "You'll never believe what I discovered on the internet today." I had some time during lunch to look up a few things on Google. One of them was Amy Bridges, along with an artist. Let's go to your computer and I'll show you what I discovered. John followed Barbara to his office, where she initiated the search. There were only a few results, so she selected the first. A web page for a Parisian newspaper appeared, with a photograph on the left side. John saw Amy standing in front of a large painting, with her husband on the right side. A young woman stood beside him, holding his arm in both of her hands. Amy Bridges, a caption artist, displayed her work beneath the photo, Amanda and her nanny. On the right are her husband, Professor Peter Bridges, and his assistant. The visible portion of the painting depicted a child and an older woman standing in front of a house. Someone could be seen in the home's doorway. The image was too small to see any more detail. "Well," said John, "Amy appears to be on track to complete her goals. I doubt that the French newspapers feature every artist's work on their pages." Barbara then stated, "Once I found this, I looked up the name of the painting." Amanda and her nanny, Barbara, then launched a new search and chose one of the results displayed. A page appeared showing the painting in its entirety. It was still relatively small, so she clicked again, this time on the image itself. It expanded to fill the entire screen. John could now see the entire painting with clarity. Amanda was clearly the child figure, but he was surprised to see Vicky Pierce as the adult with her. In the distance, the shadowed figure in the doorway appeared to be him. Amy had previously obscured a portion of the painting on the left side. The figure was of a woman dressed in black, with a black shawl over her head. She was looking away from the viewer and toward the child. "I see Amanda and Mrs. Pierce, and I'm certain the man in the doorway is you, John. But this woman in the front, I don't understand," Barbara said. John was silent for a while before saying, "I believe that is your sister. Amy is the person depicted. I believe this is a painting of sadness, perhaps even regret." Barbara considered what John had said and responded, "You could be right. You can see the side of her face, and it could be her. I don't understand why she painted Mrs. Pierce as the nanny instead of me. I believe she painted this from a photo. Lynn was here one day when Vicky and Amanda went for a walk, and she met them in front of the house. She took one photograph, which most likely served as the basis for this painting, which features me in the background. Amy must have recently decided to portray Vicky as the nanny. I suppose it's an artistic license." John printed several copies of the painting, intending to give one to Vicky. She had been immortalized, and he expected her to enjoy it. After handing Vicky her copy, he and Barbara sat in the kitchen for their now customary coffee and conversation. "So, Barbara, how are your classes going currently? I know you were overwhelmed for the first few weeks, but I bet you're feeling better now." She sighed and said, "You were correct. I don't feel as much pressure now. It's still difficult, and it'll take a long time for me to feel completely comfortable. However, things have definitely improved. I'm really enjoying my classes, even though this semester is all about the required subjects. I'm sure next semester will be more interesting because there will be classes focused on actual design work." Later, as John stood to leave for the office, he leaned over to give Barbara a quick hug, smiling and saying, "Hang in there, Barbara. You're going to do well." She smiled back at him. Saturday, November 15th. Barbara had asked John a week earlier not to plan anything for his birthday evening because she planned to take him out. She informed him that she had made supper reservations at the Sheraton again, where they had previously celebrated his birthday. All week, John had been looking forward to their dinner together. Vicky Pierce arrived around 5 o'clock to babysit Amanda. Barbara was already in her room getting ready to go out, so John went upstairs to prepare. After showering, shaving, and changing into his new suit, he looked in the mirror and decided he didn't look too bad for 32 years old. His exercise routine had helped him lose nearly 20 pounds, prompting him to replace the majority of his wardrobe. He decided he hadn't looked this good since high school sports. Barbara was already waiting for him when he arrived downstairs. He couldn't get over how beautiful she was, and he told her so. She suggested he thank Domenico in the dress shop. His response was that the credit was entirely hers, and she should not be so modest. John told her how much he liked her new hairstyle. She had let her hair grow longer, and it was now styled in loose curls. She chose a green satin dress with a low neckline that hugged her figure. As they prepared to depart, John offered Barbara his arm, but she took his hand. They walked out to the car, hand in hand, and John thought to himself, this seemed like such a natural thing to do, during the drive to the Sheraton. They talked about Barbara's university classes and how she was coping with the workload. When they arrived at Sheraton, they were seated close together in one of the alcoves, which allowed them some privacy. John noticed that several of the male diners had given her the once-over as they were led to their table and asked her if she had noticed the approving looks she was getting. She responded that women always noticed them and laughed. They ate a leisurely meal and finished with a light dessert. Because neither of them wanted to undo the good work of their exercise programs, by the time they finished eating, the band had already begun playing. When John realized the band had begun a nice, slow song, he abruptly stopped speaking and stated, "We can't waste music like that." "Do you want to dance, Barbara?" She replied, "I would love to." John took her hand and they walked out onto the dance floor. As he took her in his arms, she moved closer to him, and as they began to dance, they were firmly joined. This was a new experience for John, as had all of their previous visits to the dance floor. They had maintained some distance between themselves. "This is nice," Barbara said as they danced around the floor. "It certainly is," John said softly into her ear. After he said that, John noticed Barbara drawing even closer to him as they moved around the floor. He grew concerned. As they danced at the end of the next song, he became increasingly aroused by the touch of her body. He suggested they sit for a while. They sat together and talked until the next set of slow songs began. When the first slow song began, Barbara said, "Come on, John. They're playing some nice music. Let us dance." She took his hand and led him back onto the dance floor. Again, they danced as closely as possible. John realized there was nothing he could do about it, so he kept dancing even when her closeness and the sensual movements of the dance aroused him. He tried to keep his arousal from pressing against her, but it was difficult. They continued to get up and dance whenever the band played slow music. They both appeared to enjoy the most. Finally, around midnight, they decided to depart. They walked out together, agreeing that they had had a great time. Barbara said as they drove home that her parents used to tell us how when they were younger, there were no seatbelt laws, and Mom would always snuggle up against Dad as they drove home from a date. "I've always wanted to try it, so please drive carefully." She undid her seatbelt and moved beside John, wrapping her arm around his left shoulder and resting her head on the right. "That feels good," John said. He removed his right arm from the wheel and wrapped it around Barbara. They drove the final 10 blocks home in this manner until John needed both hands on the wheel to get into the garage. When John turned off the car, Barbara turned to him, drew his face to hers, and kissed him. This wasn't the short, proper kiss from a year ago, but rather the kiss of a lover. After about a minute of intense kissing, John broke off and backed away slightly. "We should go in before we get carried away, Barbara. Besides, Vicky probably heard us pull in and is wondering where we are." They entered the house and were greeted by Vicky. She was wearing her jacket and said she was eager to get home. After she left, John took Barbara's hands in his and said, "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Barbara. I really enjoyed it." Barbara moved closer to John and asked, "What makes you think the evening is over?" Before he could respond, she leaned forward and kissed him briefly. She took his hand, turned, and led him upstairs. As they ascended the stairs, John said, "I hope you didn't get me anything else." "The meal and evening out were fantastic." She didn't respond. At the top of the stairs, Barbara entered John's room through the doorway. She led him to the foot of the bed where she let go of his hand and turned on the small lamp on the bedside table. John's expression was puzzled as she returned to him and took him in her arms. She smiled up at him before leaning forward to kiss him. This kiss was one of the lover's varieties. Again, he was the one who ended the kiss, saying, "We shouldn't be doing this. You're too young and I am your guardian. I have not been too young since August 17th when I turned 18. Don't forget, when I turned 18, you stopped being my guardian. I'm no longer a child. I can make all of my own decisions." Barbara moved forward to kiss John again, but he leaned back and inquired, "How about your parents? If they discovered I was kissing you in this manner, they would most likely be furious. They've always trusted me with you and your well-being. Do you recall the good times we had last New Year's Eve? That night and on New Year's Day, my parents both talked to me about you. They said they'd noticed how much I liked you, and they were concerned. They weren't concerned about your thoughts on me. They suspected I was paying too much attention to you. I agreed to start going out with some of the guys at school who had asked me out. I did it for them, not for myself. When I went to Minnesota to celebrate my birthday, we talked about you again. I told them how much I cared for you and wanted to be with you. They liked you and agreed that if I had made up my mind, I was old enough to make my own choices about you. Barbara placed her hands behind John's head, pulled him close, and kissed him again. After another minute of this, he broke their kiss and asked Barbara, "Are you sure you want to do this?" He was staring at her intently, attempting to read the emotions on her face. Barbara looked back at him, and he could see tears welling up in her eyes. She asked, "Don't you like me, John? Please do not say you don't want me." John moved his hands to the sides of her face and looked her in the eyes, saying, "I've really liked you for a long time. I'm starting to believe I'm in love with you. I just don't want to be wrong and end up hurting you in the same way that I was hurt." Barbara's relief was palpable, and a big smile lit up her face. She kissed John again and said, "Thank you, John. I appreciate you telling me that. I feel the same way you do." They exchanged another deep kiss, but Barbara ended it. She took John's hand and led him to the side of the bed. She turned and said, "Before you ask. Yes, I am sure I know. You said you were certain, Barbara, but you can still choose to go to your own room. I'd understand." Barbara gave a new look of determination and said, "No, this is what I want. I want you." John seemed unsure what to say for a moment before saying, "You've never made love before. You were not interested in any of the men you dated. Neither of them were you, John." Barbara said, "I've been waiting for you." John took her into his arms and held her close. They created tender love. She smiled up at him. She continued to hold him. "That was everything I hoped it would be. I love you so much, John." John bent forward, kissed her gently on the lips, and said, "I think I love you too, Barbara. For several months I knew I was falling for you. I never expected you to feel the same way. I was afraid to even dream about it, after everything I've been through with Amy." He gave her another small kiss before they rolled to their side, still connected. When they awoke in the morning and realized they still had some time before Amanda woke, they made love again. Neither of them wanted to end it, but they both knew Amanda would be demanding breakfast, so they took a quick shower and were downstairs dressed for breakfast. Amanda joined them in the kitchen, and they were prepared. Saturday, April 24th. It was a pleasant spring day, and John was watching an afternoon hockey game on television. He had spent the morning at the office, updating the bookwork. He had 7 employees in payroll receivables, and general accounting kept him busy the majority of the time. He still worked in the evenings so that he could keep an eye on Amanda throughout the day. Barbara remained her primary caregiver in the evenings, though they did frequently hire Vicki Pierce because she enjoyed caring for Amanda. He couldn't believe that in another month and a few days, he would have been divorced from Amy for 2 years. There had been so much change during that time. He smiled as he recalled some of the events of those turbulent 2 years. He just returned his attention to the game when his front doorbell rang. He turned off the game and rose to answer the door. Lynn Cameron proved to be the expected salesman. Lynn: "Come in. How've you been? I've tried calling you several times, but all I've received is your voicemail." He glanced towards the door and asked, "Where is Mark?" "You are supposed to bring him around to meet me. Mark has to work today, but I promised to bring him over to meet you. He and I are now engaged. That is why I was not available when your calls came in. We were gone on a cruise for 6 weeks. That's when he proposed to me. I intended to return your calls, but things got in the way." "Congratulations, Lynn. I'm so happy for you," Lynn said, accepting John's congratulatory hug and kiss on the cheek. "I'm not really talking about Mark and me. I'm not sure how to put it, but Amy is back in town. She is in my car and would like your permission to come in to see you and Amanda. If you'd rather not, simply say so. I'll take her back to my place. I believe you should speak with her, though." Lynn's expression indicated that she was almost pleading with John to say yes. John pursed his lips and paused for several moments before saying, "I guess it's time. Bring her in and we can chat. There are some things I need to tell her." Lynn had a few sieves in her belongings and dashed out the door and down to her car. John could see that someone was sitting in the passenger seat, but he didn't recognize Amy. He left the door open and returned to the living room, sitting on the sofa. He knew this day would come, but he was surprised. He wasn't nervous about it. Rather, he was in a satisfied state of calm. Within a minute, he heard the screen door open and footsteps in the hallway. Lynn rounded the corner, followed by Amy. John's first impression was that she was thinner now. He didn't recognize her outfit, and she had cut her hair extremely short. She gave a nervous smile when she saw him, and then joined Lynn on the love seat on the other side of the coffee table from John. "Hello, John. You're looking great." She looked around the living room and noticed that some of the furniture had been replaced and others rearranged. "I see you've made some changes here. It seems very comfortable. Yes, things change. The business has been doing well lately, so I thought it was time to invest in some new furniture." John sat comfortably. His left arm stretched along the back of the sofa while his right rested on the arm. "I am glad to hear that. It's performing well. I'm sorry I left you with the extra debt. I am sure it didn't make things easy for your business." Amy was nervously twisting a handkerchief in her fingers. "Do not worry about it. I've managed to handle everything quite well. Thanks. There are many things. I suppose I'll have to explain to you while you're here." John shifted in his seat, preparing to explain to Amy what she hadn't heard about. "I came here to explain a few things to you, John. I've been thinking about what to say to you for a long time, and I'd really appreciate your permission to simply say what I have to say, if that's what you prefer. Go ahead." John sat back, puzzled by Amy's statement. "The first thing I have to say is that leaving you was the biggest mistake I've ever made. I found out that Peter lied to me from the start. I sincerely apologize for doing that to you." Lynn reached over and placed a calming hand on Amy's shoulders. Amy had been looking down as she said this, but she now looked up into John's eyes as she went on. "I learned shortly after arriving in Paris that I was his third wife. He'd been married and divorced twice before, and I happened to run into his second wife while shopping for art supplies. I started talking to another American woman in the shop, and it wasn't long before I discovered that she, too, had been married to Peter Bridges. We went out for coffee after she insisted that I know certain details about Peter. She was from Boston, and like me, she had been married when Peter spoke his way into her heart, just as he had done to mine. She left her husband and traveled to Paris with Peter a year before I met him. She told me it didn't take her long to figure out what he was really like, and how he was constantly pursuing the women in his classes. She warned me that he would do it to me too. At first I didn't believe her, but I soon realized she was telling the truth. About 3 months after we arrived, Peter hired one of the students, a young girl, as his assistant. Almost immediately I suspected that he was seducing her. Within a few months, it was clear that I was correct. He began to make no secret about his affair with her. I was enrolled in classes there and had spent all of my money on my studio, so I felt trapped and forced to accept the situation. John interrupted Amy's story by holding up his hand and saying, "I think I saw the girl. We saw a photo on the internet of you and your husband with his assistant. It had to do with your painting of Amanda and her nanny. I think I have a copy of it somewhere." "Yes, that is her. That was one of several paintings that I was successful with. I'm glad you could see it." She smiled at John and stopped pulling on her handkerchief. "I know you painted the picture using a photo Lynn sent you. I remember when it was taken. It is incorrect in one respect, however. The nanny in the photo was not Amanda's. That was Mrs. Pierce from the next door." Amy was perplexed and looked at Lynn before saying, "Oh, we both assumed that woman was the nanny you hired. Maybe while I'm here I'll meet her. Is Amanda here? I haven't heard her since we entered. She's out on a shopping trip. I expect them to be home soon." As he went on, John's expression became serious. "Really? I should also explain a few things to you, Amy. Please allow me to finish my story first, if you do not mind. I need you to understand how bad I feel about what I did to us. I wish I could undo it all." Her eyes were filled with unshared tears, and Lynn reached over to comfort Amy once more. "I met with Peter's second wife over coffee on several occasions. I asked her why she hadn't returned to Boston, and she said she didn't have anything to go back to. Her husband had remarried, and she did not have any family there. She told me that during her one trip home, almost none of her former friends wanted to speak with her. She has decided to remain in Paris in order to start over. At our second or third meeting, she told me about Peter's first wife. He met her while teaching in Montreal 2 years before marrying his second wife. Amy occasionally dabbed at her eyes. She is obviously fighting back tears, just like Jane and me. Jane was his second wife. She was already married when Peter met her. She left her husband for him and found out what he was like shortly after they arrived in Paris. She left him to return to her first husband, only to discover that he had committed suicide shortly after she had left for Paris. According to Jane, his first wife, whose name I do not know, flew back to Paris with the intention of killing Peter. When she failed to do so, she killed herself. Amy paused from time to time to regain her composure. She remained silent for nearly a minute before speaking. "I'd like to believe that there was still hope for us to be friends again." She spoke to a spot near her feet because she didn't want to catch John's eye again. "I understand how much I've hurt you. I felt the same way when I heard you were dating Lynn. Knowing it was more than a casual friendship, I cried when I received the email informing me that you had spent the night at her house. I know it's foolish of me to say that, given that we divorced, and I was the reason for it." There was another pause before Amy continued. "Last month, Peter and his assistant Esme left for Venice for 2 months. He informed me that when he returned, he would bring Esme into our bed. That is the whole reason he is doing this. He wishes to have 2 women to share him. As soon as they left for Venice, I finished all of my artwork, packed my belongings, and sold what was left for airfare back home." She paused and said, "And here I am. I'm currently staying at Lynn's, but once my belongings arrive, I'll need to find a place of my own." Amy was about to proceed when the side door to the kitchen opened. They all heard right away, "Daddy! Daddy, Daddy, we've arrived home. We got ice cream. Can we get some now?" Amanda dashed into the living room and jumped into her father's arms, completely ignoring the 2 women on the love seat. "I think the ice cream can wait until after supper. We've got some company, Amanda." John turned her around on his lap and felt her stiffen slightly when she saw Amy. "That's Lynn. And is she your first mother?" As John introduced their guests, he pointed to each one. "Amanda, do you remember your first mommy?" Lynn and Amy both looked at him, as he referred to Amy as Amanda's first mother. But their gazes shifted to Amanda as she nodded slowly. "How about you give her a hug and kiss?" "Amanda." John set her on the floor, and she walked slowly around the coffee table, her gaze fixed on Amy the entire time, until she stood up. Amy was clearly crying and reached down to pick her up. She and Amanda exchanged hugs and kisses, while Lynn wiped a tear on her cheek. Amanda moved back slightly to look at her mother. The side door opened again, and heavy bags hit the tabletop. Amanda bolted from Amy's knee and dashed to the kitchen, hollering, "Mommy, Mommy, we had company first! Mommy's here!" Barbara surprised Amy and Lynn by entering the living room with Amanda in her arms. Amy immediately rose to her feet and dashed forward. "Babs, what are you doing here? My God, you've grown! Where is your brace? I can't believe how great you look." Barbara put Amanda down and hugged her older sister. "I got rid of my braces nearly 2 years ago. I'm currently in university." "University? I can't believe this. I've tried calling you Mom and Dad since I returned to town, but all I get is an answering machine." "Where have you been?" "Mom and Dad are in Arizona right now. They visited Las Vegas last month." "Arizona and Las Vegas. How long have they stayed there?" "How about you?" "They have been traveling extensively for the past 2 years, ever since your departure. John made arrangements with us. They could finally begin their retirement. And I came to live as Amanda's nanny. Are you her nanny?" Amy and Lynn both said the same thing, then exchanged looks. And Barbara, John realized it was time to join the conversation, saying, "Barbara has been a wonderful nanny for Amanda and has done an excellent job of nurturing her while I worked evenings. She has been a mother to her in every way for over 2 years. Yes, I heard her call Barbara Mommy. Do you think that is wise, John?" Amy had regained some confidence and was looking directly at John when she said this. Amanda had moved beside Barbara, hugging her leg as she observed the adults conversing. Everyone was standing now, and John moved next to Barbara. When John finally responded to Amy, he said softly, "Barbara is Amanda's mother now. She legally adopted her, and the final paperwork arrived this week. As John mentioned, Barbara is now her legal mother, but you will always be her birth mother." Amy's mouth had dropped open, and she watched incredulously as John finished speaking. "How? What do you mean? Amanda was adopted. How can she do that?" I am her mother." Amy's neck and face were turning red, and John could tell she was angry. "You gave up all of your rights, Amy. Remember, everything is perfectly legal." John didn't want a shouting match in front of Amanda, so he was still speaking softly to Amy. "But why are you doing this?" Amy inquired, her voice rising. Lynn was now holding Amy's arm, and her expression indicated that she agreed with Amy on this. John moved beside Barbara and placed his arm around her before saying, "Because Barbara and I are married." "We married during the March break in Las Vegas." Lynn was too shocked to say anything, but Amy was able to whisper, "I've never been married before." She turned shakily and walked out of the house. Lynn was clearly taken aback by John's revelation, but said, "I'll help her to the car and return." She rushed after Amy. John and Barbara walked to the door with Amanda, watching Lynn catch up with Amy and help her into the car. Amy was visibly upset, sitting with her hands to her face and rocking gently back and forth in her seat. Lynn returned home after speaking with her for a few minutes. John had picked up Amanda and was holding her with one arm while keeping Barbara firmly at his side. When Lynn reached the door, they separated and returned to the foyer. I'm not sure, but she might be in shock. These were two very heavy pieces of news to deliver to her. John. I wished I had known she was coming. I could have let you prepare her, Lynn. I tried calling you before we went to Vegas. We wanted to invite you and Mark to join us, as Vicky Pierce and Barbara's parents were the only ones there. Amanda, of course, Barbara's parents are fine with this. Lynn seemed surprised. Absolutely. They recommended it and purchased our tickets from there. They knew we had been living together as husband and wife since November. Actually, it's been since my birthday. Barbara, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up, saying, "I believe they wanted him to make an honest woman out of me." She gave a small chuckle before kissing John on the cheek. Lynn looked at the two of them and said, "You make a lovely couple." "Congratulations to the three of you. I'm just not sure how Amy is going to handle this. She's also broke and has no real skills other than painting. She can stay with me until something happens, I suppose." John raised an eyebrow at Barbara, who gave him a small nod in response. He returned to Lynn and said, "We can probably help her a little. She could have asked for much more in her divorce. I am sure her parents will want to help her as well. We'll set something up. Our business is doing very well right now." They said their goodbyes, and John and his family watched the car drive away. Amy's hands were still covering her face, but she was now slumping in her seat. She did not look back. Barbara and John stood side by side, each with one arm around the other. Amanda stood in front of them and asked, "Why is the first mommy crying?" Barbara waited a few seconds before answering. She said, "Amanda, she is very sad. How come, Mommy? How come?" Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, leave a comment below with your thoughts on what